For the first time in his life, an 8-year-old boy takes a step without his cane. His mother drops to her knees in the middle of the courtyard, unable to speak. And the boy who forged him a steel boot in a single night doesn't even know how he ended up in this world. He knows only one thing: the city behind the wall has 6 months left. But let's go back 4 days. The first thing he feels is heat. The second is the smell of sulfur and burnt iron. The third is a blow. A heavy hand slams into the back of his head so hard his teeth chatter and everything goes white before his eyes. Someone is yelling in a foreign language right in his ear, and in a second, the language becomes clear. It's as if a switch flips in his head. The bastard's been drinking again. Blow the bellows. He lies face down in the ashes. He raises his hand. His fingers are long and rough, with black soot in the cracks of his skin. It's not his hand. He sits up. Before him is a blacksmith's forge made of stone and clay. The coals glow dark red. Pliers and hammers hang above the forge. To the right is an anvil. To the left is a barrel of water. This is a real smithy. Standing over him is a one-eyed old man. His gray beard is braided into a plate. His hands are like tree roots. His apron is scorched in 10 places, and in his single eye, not a shred of pity. Blow the bellows, or get out of my smithy. He stands up. His body is light and strong, about 25 years old, and then a translucent panel flashes before his face. Bluish. 2 words. Workshop. Level 1. He reaches out and his fingers pass right through it. The old man sees nothing. The old man sees only the apprentice standing there like a pillar instead of working. He walks over to the bellows and presses down on the handle. The coals flare up brighter. He decides he'll think about it later. Right now, he needs to pump. The old man's name is Haldor. He'll find that out in an hour when a boy pops in with a basket of bread. The bread is heavy and sour. He takes a bite and chews slowly. The taste is too real for a dream. Fine. If this is reality, then he has to live up to it. Until evening, he pumps, serves, clears away, and stays silent. He watches as Haldor strikes the horseshoes with a hammer. Every blow is precise. 20 years of experience in every movement. In the evening, he collapses onto the mattress in the attic and opens the panel with full awareness. Basic metalworking, drafting memory, material analysis. He mentally taps into his technical memory, and a crank and connecting rod mechanism unfolds before his eyes. He drew it in his sophomore year. It's his own knowledge, simply organized on shelves like a file. He clamps a nail between his fingers and the panel lights up. Iron. Carbon 0.3%. Low tensile strength. What the local blacksmith figures out by eye in a minute, he gets in 3 seconds. He lies on his back and pieces together the picture. He is in another world, in a foreign body. He has a system that helps him do what he already knows how to do. He is a mechanical engineer. He is surrounded by a medieval smithy. There is no point in panicking. He has to work. On the second day, Haldor hands him a bent sickle. He takes it in his hands and the system highlights a crack at the base of the blade, invisible to the naked eye. He pokes it with his finger. That's the weak spot. If you just straighten it, it'll snap in the field in a week. You have to weld the seam. Haldor holds the sickle up to the light. He squints for a long time. He grunts. You're right. You've got an eye for it. That evening, the old man gives him a double portion of porridge. On the 3rd day, he goes out into the town. Dornholm stands in a valley between the hills. The stone wall is old and patched. Inside are 300 houses. The streets are dirty. The faces are tired. He counts. 2 wells for the whole town. 1 smithy. The mill behind the wall grinds unevenly. 2 guards at the gate, both cripples. He returns and delves into the optimization section for the first time. He drives 3 nails into a log with the same motion. The system flashes. Repeatable process has been detected. And he unfolds the blueprint. A wooden block with a groove and a stop. You insert the workpiece, strike it, and the nail comes out the same every time. Stamping, he smirks. Haldor makes 4 horseshoes a day by hand. With a template, he can make 8. But he says nothing. First, he has to earn the right to speak. And then, on the 4th day, she arrives. Tall, red hair in a bun. She's holding the hand of a boy of about 8. The boy walks crookedly. His right foot turns inward with every step. He leans on a cane that's too long for him. The woman's name is Brenna. The boy's name is Finn. She came to fix the hinges, but he isn't looking at her. He stares intently at the boy's leg. The foot is twisted inward. The heel doesn't touch the ground. The left boot is worn down because it bears the double load. And his photographic memory pulls up an image from a reference book. An orthopedic brace, a steel frame, leather straps, a spring plate under the heel. He crouches down in front of Finn. "Let me take a look at your leg." He removes the boot. A congenital deformity. The bones have fused at an incorrect angle. A priest would help if there were one. A healing mage would help if he didn't cost half the village. He grabs a charred splinter and sketches directly on the stone floor. A tall boot. 2 steel plates on the sides for rigidity. Leather straps with buckles. Under the heel, a steel plate curved into an arch. It works like a spring. With each step, it compresses and releases energy back. It corrects the angle of the foot. A second insole for the left boot so the boy doesn't limp. Haldor approaches. He looks at the sketch. He is silent. And the old man's single eye becomes very attentive. He asks for a sheet of iron as thick as a coin. Haldor gives it to him without asking. He works all day and all night. The system highlights every micro crack. But he does it all by hand himself. Every bend, every hole for a strap. By midnight, the skin on his palms is cracked in 2 places. He wraps his hands in a rag and continues. Haldor doesn't leave. He sits on the bench and says nothing. By morning, the boot is ready. Brenna arrives with Finn. He puts the boot on the boy's right foot, tightens the straps, offers his hand. Finn stands up, takes a step, wobbles. A second, a third. The cane lies on the bench. Finn walks on his own. Unsteady, unaccustomed, but on his own. He reaches the door and turns around. And there's an expression on his face that would make an adult man's throat tighten. Brenna falls to her knees in the middle of the yard. Haldor is silent for a long time. And in the evening, when the smithy empties out, the old man sits down across from him and asks quietly, "Boy, who are you anyway?" He could have lied, but this old man gave him shelter, bread, and iron without asking questions, and so he tells the truth. "I don't know how I ended up here. I know things that no one here knows. I'm no mage or sorcerer. I just know how things work." Haldor listens. He stokes the coals. He turns. "I don't care where you're from. You fixed the sickle better than I did. You got the boy back on his feet. Tomorrow you'll be an apprentice." He nods. "Engineers and speak the same language. Do it. Show me. Prove it." He climbs up to the attic, opens the panel. A 12 in 100 success. Behind the wall, the city sleeps. Small, poor, doomed. A city with 6 months left before what comes from the eastern wastelands, from which neither walls, nor knights, nor mages can save it. He doesn't know that yet, but he knows something else. He has hands, a head, a system, and a forge. That's enough. It has to be enough. The apprentice's first week passed in sweat and coal dust. Haldor gave no quarter. The morning began before dawn with bellows, then coal, then fetch and carry, then stand and watch the master work. Don't meddle, don't get in the way, don't ask until asked. Ethan didn't argue, he watched. Haldor forged horseshoes and sickles and hinges and nails. 4 horseshoes a day, 2 sickles, a dozen nails if he was lucky. Each piece was one of a kind, each one by eye. The old man felt the metal as if it were a living thing. He knew when the iron was ready by its color and by its sound. He didn't measure the temperature because he didn't know such words. He said, "The metal sings," or "The metal is silent." Ethan listened and translated it into his own language. Sings means the temperature is within the forging range. Silence meant overheating or underheating. Cherry red was about 800 degrees. Light yellow was over 1,000. Haldor knew all this instinctively. Ethan knew it by the numbers. They were talking about the same thing in different languages. By the end of the first week, Haldor allowed him to forge nails on his own. Ethan forged 20 of them. The quality control system showed that 3 had micro cracks. He set them aside. Haldor checked the rest. He twirled them between his fingers. He grunted. "It'll do." That was the highest praise. At the same time, he explored the town. Every evening after work, he went out and walked the streets. He counted the houses, memorized faces, listened to conversations. Dornholm lived the quiet, heavy life of a border town, a little over 300 families. The market was open 3 days a week. Tea traded in grain and wool and coarse pottery. Little meat, no fish. The river was far away. The guards at the gate changed twice a day, 2 in the morning, 2 in the evening. 4 guards for the whole town, plus 2 knights in the garrison. He saw them, one with a stiff knee, the other drunk by noon every day. The wall around the town was stone at the bottom and wood at the top. The stone was old. The wood was rotten. In 3 places the logs had sagged, leaving gaps a hand's width wide between them. There was only 1 gate. The leaves were oak, but the hinges were rusty and one was loose. He memorized all of this, until he wrote it down. He had nothing to write on, and nothing to write with. In the second week, he made himself a charcoal pencil. He burned a willow branch in a closed crucible. The result was a fragile but usable writing stick. He found some boards for writing at the dump behind the mill. He planed them down. They turned into rough slabs. Haldor looked at them and tapped his temple with a finger. "Why do you need this?" "So I don't forget." "Forget what?" "Everything." Haldor snorted and went back to the anvil. Ethan began to write. The dimensions of the walls, the number of wells, the distances between houses, the width of the streets, the height of the gates. He sketched a map of the city from memory and refined it every evening. By the end of the second week, he had a map of Dornholm on 4 boards, rough but accurate. On the 3rd day of the second week, Garm came to the smithy, the junior blacksmith, about 30 years old, broad-shouldered, a red face. His hands were strong but rough. He had worked for Haldor for 5 years and believed that the smithy would go to him after the old man passed away. Ethan's arrival did not please him. Garm stood in the doorway and looked at the boards with the drawings that Ethan had hung on the attic wall. "What's this?" "Notes." "What notes?" "Working notes." Garm stepped closer. He looked at the map of the city, at the symbols Ethan had used to mark the wells, walls, and gates. Then he looked at Ethan. There was something ominous in his eyes. "What are you snooping around for? Are you a spy or something?" "I'm an apprentice." "Apprentices swing hammers, not draw squiggles." Ethan said nothing. Garm stood there a little longer. Then he spat on the floor and left. But Ethan had seen his face. This wasn't just an annoyed coworker. This was a man who had already decided that the newcomer was his enemy. That evening, Haldor mentioned in passing, "Garm is angry with you. I noticed. He thought the smithy would be his. Does that bother you?" "The only thing that bothers me is what gets in the way of my work." Haldor gave him a long look. Then he nodded. On the 4th day of the 2nd week, Ethan saw the Baroness for the first time. Aelin Dornholm rode down the main street on horseback. The horse was gray, not very tall. The Baroness wasn't very tall either. Thin, dark hair pulled back at the nape of her neck. A man's doublet, riding boots, a dagger at her belt. A young face, 20, maybe a little older. But her eyes were older. The eyes of someone who doesn't get enough sleep and carries more on her shoulders than she can handle. 2 men rode alongside her. One was a scribe with a bag of scrolls. The other was a soldier with a spear. Ethan stood at the entrance to the smithy and watched her ride by. The Baroness cast a quick glance at the smithy and rode on. She didn't know who he was. He wasn't anyone yet, just an apprentice in a scorched smock. That evening, he asked Haldor about her. The Baroness, Aelin. Her father had died. Her brother was dead. She'd been ruling alone for 3 years. A good woman, but young. Too young for what had fallen on her. What had fallen? Haldor paused. Then he said, "The eastern border. The Horde. You'd be better off not knowing yet." But Ethan already knew he needed to know everything. The next day he went to the tavern, not to drink, to listen. Dornholm's tavern was called the Rusty Nail. It was a dark, smoke-filled place with low ceilings and a sticky floor. The beer was terrible, but there were plenty of people. He sat in a corner and listened. People were talking about grain prices and the weather and how blacksmith Haldor had gotten really old and his horseshoes were crooked. Then the conversation turned to the eastern border. The voice belonged to a one-legged man in the corner, a former soldier. He said that the fortress of Ironhold had fallen 2 months ago, that the Horde had taken it in a single night, that the 500-man garrison had ceased to exist, that the mages sent from the capital held out for 3 hours. Then their mana ran out, and the beasts tore them apart like paper. That the next fortress was Kervin, and between Kervin and Dornholm lay 60 miles of open road. Ethan listened and didn't move. 60 miles. If Kervin Fortress falls, the Horde will reach Dornholm, a town with 4 guards, a rotten wall, and 2 drunken knights. He returned to the smithy. He opened the panel. Workshop, level 1. Experience 34 out of 100. Available blueprints. He scrolled through the basic category. Nails, staples, hinges, sickles, tools. Nothing military. His level was too low. The projectile weapons category unlocked at level 3. Siege equipment at level 8. He needed to gain experience. Experience was gained by crafting items. The more complex the item, the more experience. A nail gave 1 point. A sickle gave 3. An orthopedic boot gave 15. He did the math. He needed 66 points to reach level 2. That's about 20 sickles, or 5 complex items. He lay down on the mattress and thought. Not about the system, about people. About Finn, who had run past the smithy today. Run past, crookedly and awkwardly, but he ran past. Brenna followed behind, and there was a smile on her face that made her look 10 years younger. About Haldor, who grumbled and cursed, but in the morning placed his second hammer on his workbench silently, without explanation. He just put it there. About the Baroness, with eyes older than her face. About the soldier without a leg in the tavern, who spoke of the fortress as if it were a grave, his face blank as he did so. 6 months, maybe less, maybe more. But the horde is coming, and between it and these people there is nothing but a rotten wall and an old one-eyed blacksmith. And now him. The engineer from Portland who died in a store parking lot and woke up in the ashes of a foreign world. He was supposed to fall asleep, but instead he got up, went down to the smithy. He lit the oil lamp. He took out his boards, and he began to sketch. His first real project. Not nails, not sickles. A crossbow. The simplest of designs. A wooden stock, a steel bow. A bowstring made of twisted tendon. A trigger mechanism with a catch. Nothing complicated for him. A revolution for this world. He drew until dawn. The system highlighted errors and suggested optimizations. The bowstring is too thin. The stock needs to be reinforced at the point where the bow is attached. The trigger mechanism could be simplified. He made corrections and drew again. By morning, the boards held a complete crossbow blueprint. He looked at it. Looked at his hands covered in coal dust. Level 3 is still far off. The projectile weapons category is locked. But the blueprint is in his head, and when the system unlocks the category, he'll be ready. For now. Sickles, hinges, nails, work, experience. One step closer every day. Haldor went downstairs and saw him at the workbench with a lamp. He looked at the drawings, raised an eyebrow. Did you even sleep? No. Haldor shook his head. Then he looked at the crossbow drawing. He stared at it for a long time. What is this? A weapon. It shoots bolts. Far. Exactly. No archer's strength needed. Even a child could shoot it. Haldor looked at the drawing for another minute. Then he said quietly, I could have used a thing like that 20 years ago, back when there was still something to aim at. He touched his empty eye socket. Ethan didn't say anything, but he remembered. The day went on as usual. Furs, horn, hammer, anvil. But now he had a goal. Not an abstract one, a concrete one. Level up. Unlock the category. Build a crossbow. Arm people who can't wield a sword. Give a chance to a city that has no chance. He picked up the blank for a sickle. The system displayed the metal's temperature and structure. He began to forge. 3 strikes. A turn. 2 strikes. Into the horn. Wait. Remove. 3 strikes again. Rhythm. Repetition. Experience. By evening he had forged 4 sickles. 12 experience points. Workshop. Level 1. Experience 46 out of 100. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at the sunset through the open door of the smithy. Red light fell on the anvil and on his hands and on the blueprints on the wall. Somewhere beyond the horizon to the east lay the horde. Somewhere beyond the hills to the west was Count Warren, whom he did not yet know. Somewhere in the capital sat the archmages who knew more than they said. And here he was, an apprentice, level 1, 46 out of 100. Not much, but yesterday it was 34, and the day before yesterday, 20. One step closer every day. He returned to the smithy. He picked up the hammer and continued. He reached level 2 at the end of the 3rd week. Haldor had ordered 20 staples for the mill gate. Simple staples, pea-shaped, but each required a precise bend and 2 holes for nails. He made a jig, a wooden block with 2 pins to hold the workpiece and a groove for the bend. The first bracket took 10 minutes, the second 7, the third 5. By the 10th, he was stamping them out in 3 minutes each, 20 brackets in an hour and a half. Haldor stood and watched. He said nothing. Then he took the brackets. He checked each one. Identical. All 20 as twins. The old man placed them on the workbench and looked at the jig. He looked at it for a long time. Then he asked, "What's this little piece of wood?" "A template. You insert the blank and bend it, the same every time." Haldor took the jig, turned it over in his hands, smiled, and chuckled. Level 2 arrived quietly. The panel flashed green. Workshop, Level 2, new category, Advanced Metalworking. New blueprints, springs, hinges, locks, gears. He scrolled through the list and stopped. Gears. The simplest mechanism for transmitting rotation. In his world, they were cut out by machines in seconds. Here, he would have to file out every tooth by hand with a file. But this was a start. You can do things with gears. Gearboxes, winches, caulking mechanisms. He closed the panel and went to sleep. In the morning, a knock on the smithy door woke him. Not Haldor. Haldor wouldn't knock. He went downstairs. A man in his 40s was standing at the door. Thin, his face dark with a tan. His hands were large and sinewy. His right hand held a bow. His left hung strangely. His elbow wouldn't bend. The arm was straight as a stick from shoulder to wrist. The man introduced himself. Yorin. A hunter. A former hunter. 3 years ago, he went to the border, as a volunteer. One of the horde's creatures struck him in the elbow. The bone healed wrong. Now the joint doesn't work. He can't draw a bow. His family is starving. He came to Haldor to ask if the blacksmith could do anything. Anything at all. Haldor hadn't arrived yet. Ethan stood in front of Joran and looked at his arm, at the bow on his back, at the face of a man who hadn't been able to feed his family for 3 years. The system highlighted it. Left elbow joint. Range of motion approximately 170 degrees. Flexion impossible. Drawing the bow requires bending both arms. Impossible for this user. Recommendation: alternative projectile weapon that does not require bending both arms. Category: projectile weapons. Level 3. Locked. He looked at the panel. Level 3. He needed 1 more level. 100 experience points. He asked Yorin to come back in a week. Yorin looked at him as if he'd been asked to come back in a year, but he nodded and left. Ethan stood in the doorway and did the math. He needed 100 points to reach level 3. He had 0. A sickle gives 3 points. A bracket gives 2. 33 sickles or 50 brackets. Or a combination of more complex items. A week. Haldor arrived an hour later. Ethan told him about Joran. Haldor nodded. "I know him. He was a good hunter, the best in the area. Now he chops wood for food." Ethan said he needed a lot of work. Any kind. Challenging. Haldor raised an eyebrow, but he didn't ask why. There was plenty of work. The miller needed new teeth for the water wheel gear. Ethan carved 12 of them in 2 days, each tooth with a file. His fingers were blistered, but the gear fit perfectly, and the mill stopped creaking. The miller looked at the even teeth and couldn't believe it. 20 experience points. The cooper asked for hoops for barrels. Ethan made 15 of them with the conductor. All identical. 30 points. A widow from Gorshechnikov Street brought a broken lock. Ethan took it apart and saw that the spring had snapped. He made a new spring out of steel wire. The system showed the correct thickness and number of coils. The lock worked like new. 5 points. The smithy didn't close until after dark. Haldor grumbled that the boy had lost his mind, but he didn't interfere. He saw the results. In a week, more orders passed through the smithy than usually did in a month, and every order was completed better and faster than Haldor could have done on his own. The old man was silent, but Ethan saw how he was looking. Not with envy, with something like fear. The fear of an old master who realizes the world is changing and he can't keep up with it. On the 5th day of the week, Garm came again. He stood in the doorway and watched Ethan work. Then he walked over to the workbench where the blueprints lay. He picked up a board with a map of the city. He turned it over, threw it on the floor. Ethan stopped the hammer. "Pick it up." "What?" "Pick up the board." "You dropped my work. Pick it up." Garm smirked. "Or what?" Ethan put the hammer down on the anvil. He stood up. He walked over. They stood face to face. Garm was broader and heavier, but Ethan was calm. Calmness wasn't bravery, just calculation. A fight with Garm would bring nothing but bruises and trouble with Haldor. He needed something else. He bent down and picked up the board himself. He checked the drawing. It wasn't damaged. He put it back in place. He turned to Garm. "If you want Haldor's forge, it's not mine, and I'm not claiming it. I need a workbench, a forge, and work. When the master decides who gets what, that's his business. I'm not here to take your place." Garm was silent. Something flashed across his face. Not understanding. Confusion. He hadn't expected the newcomer not to jump into a fight or start making threats. He turned and walked away. But Ethan knew. This wasn't the end. Garm would be back. And next time, it would be worse. That evening, Haldor asked, "What about Garm? He stopped by." Haldor nodded. "He's afraid of you. He hates me. It's the same thing, man. Remember that." On the 6th day, Ethan finished his last order. A set of hooks for a butcher. 12 of them, each with the right curve and point. The panel flashed. Workshop, Level 3, new category, projectile weapons, crossbows, bolts, sling stones, cocking mechanisms. He opened the category and froze. The blueprints unfolded one after another. A simple crossbow. A crossbow with a goat's foot. A crossbow with a crank mechanism. A heavy fortress crossbow. Armor-piercing bolts. Incendiary bolts. Bolts with a wide tip for hunting. Each blueprint came with full specifications. Materials, tolerances, assembly. He found what he was looking for. A crossbow with a goat's foot mechanism. A lever mechanism for cocking the bowstring. With one hand, you hook the latch onto the bowstring. With your other hand, or even your foot, you press down on the lever. The bowstring snaps into place. The left elbow isn't involved. Joran will be able to shoot. On the 7th day, right on schedule, Joran arrived. Ethan laid the drawing out on the workbench in front of him. Joran looked at it and didn't understand a thing. Then Ethan explained, "It's a weapon. It shoots bolts. Short, heavy bolts. It's drawn not by hand but by a mechanism. You don't need to bend your elbow. You only need one working hand and one foot. It has a range of 150 paces, quieter than a bow, but more accurate, more powerful. It pierces chainmail." Joran listened. His face changed. First, disbelief, then hope, then something like hunger. When? 3 weeks, maybe 4. I need to gather materials and make the parts. Joran nodded. He stood up. He stood there for a moment. Then he said quietly, Master, if you do this, I'll owe you. You won't owe me anything. You'll come and pick up your crossbow and go feed your family. That's my job. Joran left. Ethan stood in the smithy and looked at the drawing. The first crossbow in the history of this world. Not for the army, not for a knight, for a disabled hunter whose family is starving. He took out some boards and began a detailed drawing. The stock made of ash, the bow made of laminated steel and horn, the string made of twisted tendon, a goat's foot mechanism, a trigger catch, a guide groove, a sighting bar. Each element on its own was simple. Together they created a weapon that would change the world. He wasn't thinking about that yet. He was thinking about Joran and his family and how in 3 weeks the man would be able to hunt again. Haldor walked over and looked over his shoulder. You're serious? Yes, you'll need ash. I know where to get it. We need a horn. Brenna can get one through the furrier. A tendon. The butcher has some. Haldor listed the materials as if he'd already decided to help. Ethan looked at him. The old man stood there, and in his one eye was something Ethan hadn't seen before. Interest. The keen, lively interest of a master who had seen something new and wanted to understand how it worked. Let's go. Show me that ash tree. They left the smithy together. For the first time in 3 weeks, not as master and apprentice, but as two going to get materials for a shared project. The ash trees grew beyond the city wall, a grove on the southern slope of the hill. Haldor pointed out 3 trees. Ethan picked up a branch, and the system lit up. Density, bending strength, moisture content, recommended drying time. He chose the tree with the best metrics. They cut the log and dragged it to the smithy. Haldor helped silently and efficiently. No unnecessary questions. When they returned, a young messenger boy was standing at the smithy's threshold, out of breath, flushed. Master Haldor, the Baroness orders you to come. Why? The boy hesitated. I don't know, Master, but she ordered that the new apprentice be brought as well. Haldor looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Haldor. They went. The Baron's castle stood on a hill in the center of Dornholm. Castle was a grand word. A 2-story gray stone house with a tower attached to the side. The tower was square. The roof had sagged. The courtyard was paved, but grass was pushing through the stones. The gate had no bars. 2 guards stood at the entrance. One of them was the one with the stiff knee. He led them inside and seated them in the hall on the 1st floor. The hall was cold. The fireplace wasn't lit. Tapestries with faded designs hung on the walls. A long table made of dark oak, scratched and stained with candle wax. 4 chairs. 2 of them were wobbly. Ethan sat down and looked around. Poor. Not destitution, but poverty. The poverty of a man who spends everything he has on others and leaves the bare minimum for himself. Aylin entered 5 minutes later, without an entourage, without a doublet, in a simple shirt and trousers tucked into boots. Her hair was loose, and there were ink stains on her forehead. She had been working on documents. She was always working on documents. She sat down and looked at them, first at Haldor, then at Ethan. Her gaze was attentive and appraising. Master Haldor, I've been told that your new apprentice made some sort of leg brace for the Widow Kirk's son, and the boy is walking. It's true, Haldor nodded. It's true, ma'am. I saw it myself. The boy is running. Aylin turned her gaze to Ethan. What's your name? Ethan. Just Ethan. No last name. Aylin raised an eyebrow slightly. In this world, The absence of a last name meant either an orphan, a vagrant, or a fugitive. None of the options were good. "Where are you from?" "From far away." Haldor intervened. "My lady, the lad has been with me for 3 weeks, works like a horse, doesn't drink, doesn't steal, golden hands. It doesn't matter. He's useful." Aelin looked at Haldor, then back at Ethan. "Show me your hands." Ethan held out his palms. Calluses, burns, coal dust caked into his skin. The hands of a blacksmith. Not a mage, not a spy, not a vagabond. Aelin nodded. "Tell me about the boot you made for the boy." Ethan told her, briefly, without unnecessary words. A twisted foot, steel plates for support, a spring under the heel, compensation on the other leg. Aelin listened without interrupting. Then she asked, "You can make something like that for others?" Ethan fell silent. He thought. "Yes, if there's suitable metal and time. I have 11 people in town with leg injuries from serving at the border. 5 walk on crutches. 3 can't walk at all. If you can get even one of them back on their feet, I want to see it." Ethan looked at her. 20 years, 11 with head injuries. He knows the number. He knows each one. That's what got to him. Not grandstanding, not an order, an exact number. 11. He needs to examine each one. Every injury is different. Every boot or brace or crutch will be custom made. It will take time. How much? He did the math. A month for 11 people. If Haldor provides the horn and the metal. Haldor grunted. "I will." Aelin stood up. She walked across the hall. She stopped by the window, with her back to them. "Master Haldor, I'll allocate you a double ration of iron from the Baron's storehouse, and an assistant for the rough work." She turned around, looked at Ethan. "And you, Master Ethan, no last name. Show me what you can do. If my men get back on their feet, I'll be in your debt." They left the castle. They walked silently along the cobblestone path down the hill. Haldor sighed. "She's a good girl. She's carrying too much on her shoulders." Ethan nodded. He had already done the math. 11 people. 11 different injuries. Custom-made orthopedic devices for each one. Plus a crossbow for Yoren. Plus the blacksmith's regular orders that couldn't be turned down. Plus gaining experience for the system. He needed more hands. He needed an assistant, not the one the Baroness would send for menial labor, but a real assistant he could train. 3 days later, the Baroness sent a boy of about 16. His name was Tim. He was quiet, broad-shouldered for his age, the son of a fallen guard. His mother worked as a laundress. Tim came in and stood silently by the smithy door. "What should I do, master?" Ethan looked at him. "Show me your hands." His hands were rough but nimble. His fingers were long. He handed Tim a hammer. "Hit the anvil. 3 times. Tim struck. The first blow was crooked. The second was straighter. The third was almost on target. "He learns fast." "Good. You'll work with me. Listen. Watch. Don't touch anything until I tell you to." Tim nodded. The following days fell into a rhythm. Morning, the horn, checking on the wounded, measurements, blueprints, forging. Each wounded man was a separate task. Former guard Crom's knee wouldn't bend. Ethan made a hinged brace out of steel and leather that stabilized the knee while walking, but allowed him to sit down. Crom rose from the chair in which he had sat for 2 years and walked across the room. Crom's wife was crying. Crom wasn't crying, but his jaw was chattering. Old man Viren had a foot amputated. The stump had healed crookedly. He lay in bed, waiting to die. Ethan spent 2 days working on the design. A wooden foot with a hinge at the ankle and a leather sleeve for the stump. lined with sheep's wool to prevent chafing. The foot had a slight springy bend to mimic the roll of a foot. Viren stood up, took 3 steps, fell. Stood up again, took 5 steps. His adult son stood nearby, holding him by the shoulder, and the son's face was such that Ethan turned away. There are things that are awkward to look at, too personal. Each patient contributed experience to the system. Not much, 5 or 8 units per item, but consistently. The panel showed progress. Level 3. Experience 67 out of 200. At the same time, he was working on a crossbow for Yoren. He carved the ash stock in 3 days. Tim helped with planing and sanding. He forged the steel bow himself. 3 attempts. The first 2 cracked during hardening. The system indicated overheated by 7 degrees, cooled too quickly. The third bow turned out fine. He checked it with quality control. Not a single microcrack. The goat's foot mechanism turned out to be more complicated than in the drawing. The lever required a precise axis of rotation. The axis needed to be made of good steel. Haldor didn't have any. Ethan spent the evening rummaging through the boat ends in the corner of the smithy and found a fragment of an old sword. The system showed it was carbon steel. Good stuff. He reforged the fragment into an axle and 2 hooks. He spent 3 days working on the trigger mechanism. It was the most delicate work. The catch had to hold the bowstring under a load of 40 kilograms and release with a light press of a finger. The tolerance was 0.5 millimeter. He filed and chased and checked and reworked. Tim watched in silence. He was learning. Haldor watched too. The old man now often stopped and watched what Ethan was doing, silently, with that very expression. Interest. A keen, lively interest. On the 21st day after work began, the crossbow was ready. It lay on the workbench, the stock of light ash polished with oil. The bow was made of dark steel. The string was twisted bull tendon. The trigger mechanism gleamed with fresh steel. The trigger was smooth. The sighting bar had 3 notches for 50, 100, and 150 paces. Ethan picked up the crossbow. He loaded the bolt. The first bolt in the history of this world went through the wall and across the entire smithy. It went 3 inches into the oak plank. Haldor walked over. He pulled out the bolt. He looked at the hole. He looked at the crossbow. He looked at Ethan. He said nothing. He just sat down on the bench and stared silently at the wall for a minute. Joran came the next morning. Ethan explained the mechanism. Here's the hook. You hook it onto the bowstring. Here's the lever. You press down with your foot. The bowstring engages the catch. You load the bolt. You aim. You pull the trigger. Joran listened with the expression of someone hearing the language of a foreign country. Then he took the crossbow in his hands. He lifted it with his right hand. His left arm wouldn't bend, but he didn't need to bend it. He hooked the hook. He stepped on the stirrup. He pressed down with his foot. The bowstring clicked into place. He placed the bolt in the groove. He raised the crossbow. He took aim. He pulled the trigger. The bolt struck the wooden target Ethan had set up in the yard. The target was 30 paces away. The bolt hit dead center. Joran lowered the crossbow. He stood there. His hands were shaking, not from weakness. He turned to Ethan. The hunter's eyes were wet. How much do I owe you? Nothing. It's your crossbow. I made it for you. Go feed your family. Joran left with the crossbow and 20 bolts. 2 days later, his wife brought a deer leg to the smithy. She silently placed it on the workbench. She silently bowed. She silently left. Ethan divided the meat into 3 portions, for Haldor, for Tim, for himself. That evening he sat in the attic and gnawed on the roasted venison. Tough, stringy, the most delicious he'd ever tasted. The panel glowed in the dark. Workshop, level 3. Experience 112 out of 200. The crossbow had given him 35 experience points, the most difficult thing he'd created so far. He closed his eyes. Through the wall, he could hear Haldor snoring downstairs. Outside the window, the wind. A quiet town. A sleeping town. 300 families who don't yet know that in a few months, something will come here that even mages flee from. He can't save them alone. He can't build a wall. He can't kill the horde. But he can give them tools. Crossbows, bolts, traps. He could teach people to use things that didn't yet exist in this world. And if he was lucky, if they gave him time and metal and hands, he would give this city a chance. Small, but real. He fell asleep with the taste of venison on his lips and the blueprint for a second crossbow in his head. The rumor spread the very next day. He didn't start it. Yoren returned from the hunt with 2 deer and a hare. He brought everything to the market square. People watched. Yoren hadn't hunted in 3 years. Everyone knew. The hand, the elbow, the cripple. And here he stood with 2 deer, smiling like a boy. They asked him a question. He showed them the crossbow. He demonstrated how the mechanism worked. He hooked the bowstring with 1 hand. People stood and watched, in silence. Then they started talking, all at once. A day later, 3 people came to Haldor's smithy. 3 days later, 7. A week later, there was a line starting in the morning. Everyone needed something. A hunter wanted a crossbow just like that one. A guard wanted spearheads. A farmer wanted a plow with a new design. A carpenter wanted a tool he couldn't describe in words but showed with his hands, and Ethan understood. A plane. He needed a plane. He couldn't satisfy everyone. It was physically impossible. 1 man, 1 forge, 1 anvil. Even with Tim. Even with the system. He sat down that evening and did the math. 10 crossbows for the guards. That was the Baroness's order, a priority. Plus the remaining orthopedic devices. 6 of the 11 wounded had already received theirs. 5 were waiting. Plus a steady stream of private orders. Plus the regular blacksmithing work that fed Haldor. He needed a plan. He took out some boards and began sketching out a schedule. Mornings from dawn until noon, orthopedic work. Noon until evening, crossbows. Evening until midnight, small orders and training Tim. Night, blueprints and planning, 4 hours of sleep. Haldor looked at the schedule. You'll be dead in a month. I won't die. You're not made of iron. I am for now. Haldor shook his head, but he didn't argue. Ethan started working according to the schedule. The first 3 days went smoothly. On the 4th day, he dropped the hammer on his foot. It didn't cut to the bone, but it cut deep. Brenna came by in the evening. She came every evening, with food and ointments. She saw his foot, she washed it, she bandaged it. Her expression was such that Ethan felt awkward. That's how you look when someone is dear to you. You're killing yourself. I'm working. Those are different things. No, it's the same thing. You work as if you're running away from something. He looked at her. Red hair, a weathered face, the hands that had just bandaged his foot. She was beautiful. Not the kind of beauty that catches your eye, but the kind you notice gradually, when you get used to her voice and the scent of herbs that always surrounded her. "I'm not running. I'm in a hurry. There's a difference." "Where are you rushing to?" he wanted to say. "The Horde. 6 months, maybe less. Your city will be wiped off the face of the earth if I don't make it in time." But he didn't say it. It's too soon. She already can't sleep at night, fearing for Finn. No need to add to her worries. Just a lot of work. Brenna looked at him for a long time. Then she stood up. "I'll come by tomorrow morning and bring you breakfast. And you'll eat it. All of it. And you'll eat every day, 3 times, because a dead blacksmith won't help anyone." She left. Ethan sat there, staring at the closed door. Then he smirked. Haldor grumbled from the corner. "Listen to the old lady. She knows what she's talking about." In the morning, Brenna brought porridge with honey and melted butter, a bowl the size of a basin. He ate it all. She nodded and left. It became a ritual. Every morning, every evening, Brenna with food, Brenna with hand ointment. Brenna, who silently took away the dirty clothes and brought clean ones. She asked for nothing. Didn't say a word more than necessary. She was just there. Finn would run into the smithy every afternoon, in his boot. He was already running with confidence. He limped barely noticeably. The boy would sit in the corner and watch them work. Once, Ethan let him hold a file. He showed him how to run it along the metal. Finn ran it crookedly and clumsily, but with a look on his face as if he'd been entrusted with the world's greatest secret. Brenna stood in the doorway and watched her son, then at Ethan, and she turned away. Ethan didn't see it. He was explaining the file's teeth to Finn. He made the second crossbow in 10 days instead of 21, the third in 8, the fourth in 6. The system was working. Process optimization suggested jigs and templates for every repetitive action. He made a device for bending the limbs, a template for cutting the stock, a jig for assembling the trigger mechanism. Each new crossbow was slightly better than the last, slightly more accurate, slightly lighter. Quality control caught every defect. By the end of the 2nd month, there were 6 crossbows in Dornholm, 1 with Joran, 5 in the guard's arsenal. Aylin came to the smithy in person, not by messenger, by herself, on horseback. She dismounted at the door. She went inside. She looked at the crossbows laid out on the workbench, each one numbered, each one tested, each one custom-fitted for a specific guard. She picked one up, raised it, aimed at the wall. Heavy. Not for you. Just right for guard Volta, for whom it's intended. He has long arms and a strong grip. Aylin looked at him. You fitted each one to a specific person. Yes. Why? Because a weapon that fits the shooter shoots more accurately, and an accurate shot means a living guard. Aylin was silent. Then she placed the crossbow on the workbench, carefully. I need 10, by the end of the month. 10 to go with the 5 we already have. I understand. Ethan, he looked at her. For the first time, she called him by his name. Not master, not apprentice. Ethan, thank you, for my people. She turned and walked out. Haldor stood by the forge and pretended not to hear, but the old man's one eye was shining. That evening, Garm came for the 3rd time. This time he wasn't alone. There were 2 with him, guys from the mill district, big guys, drunk. They stood by the smithy, and Garm spoke loudly, so everyone could hear. It's witchcraft. A normal blacksmith doesn't do things like that. He draws symbols on the floor. I saw it myself. He talks to thin air, stands there staring into space. A sorcerer. Ethan stepped out onto the threshold. He looked at Garm, at his men. They were drunk, but not drunk enough to pick a fight with the blacksmith at his own anvil. Tim stood behind Ethan with a hammer in his hand. A 16-year-old boy, but he already held the hammer with confidence. Garm, you saw my drawings on the floor. Those aren't magic symbols. They're measurements. Length, width, height. Any blacksmith sketches before he works. You don't sketch because you work by eye. I sketch because I want precision. The difference between us isn't in sorcery. It's in the method. Garm clenched his fists. Normal people don't do what you do. Normal people don't put iron boots on the feet of cripples. Ethan looked at him calmly. Finn the boy, Joran the hunter, Crom the guard, Viren the old man. Name some more. Garm fell silent. His men exchanged glances. One of them knew Crom personally. He'd seen Crom rise from the chair he'd been sitting in for 2 years. The man took a step back. Garm was left alone. He stood there. He spat. He left. Ethan returned to the smithy. Tim exhaled. I thought they'd come after us. They won't. Not yet, anyway. Haldor stepped out of the shadows. He stood there with a heavy hammer in his hand. Silently. Ethan looked at the old man. Haldor stood up for him. Not for Garm. Not for his former student. For a stranger. That meant more than words. At night he lay in the attic and thought. Garm isn't dangerous in and of himself. Garm is dangerous because he says what many people think. Sorcery, heresy, the devil's craft. In a world where magic exists and is controlled by guilds and academies, anything that goes beyond the bounds of the understandable is automatically suspect. A man who does impossible things without magic is an anomaly. And anomalies in medieval society are burned. He needs protection. Not walls and not a sword. Reputation. Every person he has helped get back on their feet is a vote in his favor. Every crossbow in a guard's hands is an argument. Every working mechanism is proof. Not sorcery, craftsmanship. A week later, he finished the last orthopedic device from Aylin's order. The 11th wounded man. A young guy in his 20s. He'd lost 3 fingers on his left hand. He couldn't hold a shield. He couldn't work. Ethan made him a prosthetic glove, a steel frame for his palm with 3 mechanical fingers that locked into place with spring clips. The young man could hold a shield. He could hold a pitchfork. He could hold reins. He squeezed and the mechanical hand and laughed. Aylin stood nearby. She went around to all 11 of them. She visited each one personally. She looked each one in the eye. She said something quietly to each one that made their faces change. She was a good baroness. She just didn't know how to protect them. That evening, Aylin came to the smithy alone, without guards, without a scribe. She sat down on a bench by the forge. Haldor had left. Tim had left. Ethan stood by the anvil with a hammer in his hand. Ethan, I want to show you something. She pulled a scroll from behind her belt, unrolled it. A map. The eastern border. Fortresses. Roads. Marked with red crosses. Ironhold. Fallen. Caerwyn, besieged. 3 villages between them. Empty. Red crosses. Empty. Ethan stared at the map. Caerwyn was under siege. It was worse than he'd thought. If Caervan falls. When Caervan falls. Because judging by the number of red crosses, it will fall. 60 miles from us. Yeah. How many do they have? Intelligence reports. The Horde's vanguard is about 2,000 beasts. Behind them is the main wave. Unknown numbers. Maybe 10,000. Maybe more. Ethan put down his hammer. How many fighters do we have? 4 guards, 2 knights, 12 militiamen who know how to wield a spear, 5 of them with crossbows. Ethan closed his eyes. 18 men against 2,000 beasts. He opened his eyes. How much time do we have? Aelin paused. 3 months, maybe 4, maybe 2. It depends on how long Caervan holds out. Ethan looked at the map. He looked at Aelin. She was sitting upright, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight, her face calm. But he could see. He had already learned to see. Her fingers were clenched so tight her knuckles were white. She was terrified. And she had come to him, not to the knights, not to the mage, to the blacksmith. Because in 2 months, the blacksmith had done more for her people than all the knights and mages had in 3 years. He sat down next to her. He looked at the map. He began to speak. Walls. We need to reinforce the wall. Replace the rotten wood. Seal the cracks. Reforge the gate. New hinges. Iron bolts. Crossbows. Not 10. 30. 50. As many as we can manage. Every peasant who can hold a crossbow is a fighter. Traps. A moat in front of the wall. Stakes at the bottom. Traps made of sharpened stakes on the approaches. Barbed wire between the posts at knee height. No oil, but there is pitch. Pots of pitch on the walls. He needs a bigger forge. He needs apprentices. Not just Tim. 10. 20. He needs iron. Lots of iron. He needs time. Aelin listened. Her fingers unclenched. She looked at him, and something in her face changed. Not hope. Not hope yet. Direction. For the first time in 3 years, someone had told her not, "We will die with honor," but, "Here is a plan." She stood up. "You'll get everything you asked for. Come to the castle tomorrow morning. We'll make a list." She left. Ethan sat alone in the empty smithy. The forge was dying down. The embers flickered. He opened the panel. Workshop, Level 3. Experience 189 out of 200. 11 points to Level 4. The Traps and Defensive Structures category unlocks at Level 5. Siege Weapons at Level 8. He needs to level up. Faster. He stood up. He walked over to the workbench. He picked up the blank for a new crossbow, and he began to work. The morning at the castle began with a map. Aelin spread it out on the table and pinned the corners down with candlesticks. Ethan stood across from her and watched. The map was old, the ink had faded, but the outlines of the walls and streets were still legible. He took out his boards with the city plan. He placed them next to it. Aelin looked at his drawing, then at the old map, then back at the drawing. "Yours is more accurate. I measured it with my steps." She nodded and pushed the old map aside. They worked for 2 hours. Ethan drew and explained. The wall. The perimeter is about 1,200 paces. The stone foundation is solid. The upper wooden section is rotten along 70% of its length. Replacement will take a month if we have wood and people. There's only 1 gate. That's both good and bad. Bad because if the gate is breached, there's nowhere to retreat. Good because we only have to defend 1 entrance. No towers. That's bad. We need at least 4 platforms on the walls for crossbowmen. The moat. There is no moat in front of the wall. We need one. 2 meters deep, 3 meters wide, sharp stakes at the bottom. A row of trapping pits in front of the moat. Sharp stakes driven into the ground at an angle. Any creature that runs toward the wall will first run into the slingshots and then fall into the moat. Aylin listened and took notes. The quill scratched across the parchment. Her handwriting was small and neat. She didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She wrote everything down. Then she looked up. People. How many are needed? At least 40 crossbowmen on the wall. Diggers are needed for the moat and the palisade. 50 men for 2 weeks. Another 30 to prepare the timber for the wall. That's a total of 120 men taken off their regular work for a month. That's a third of the working population. Aylin set down her quill. She looked out the window. If I take 120 men off the fields and out of the workshops, the city will be left without a harvest. If I don't, the city will be left without walls and without people. She was silent. Then she nodded. I will convene the council. The Dornholm Council consisted of 5 people. The Baroness, the first knight, Sir Bran, a drunk with a bad knee, but formally the garrison commander, Oswald the miller, the richest man in town, he owned a mill and 2 granaries, Greta, the market warden, a tough woman in her 50s who controlled trade and tax collection, and Thomas the priest, an elderly of the Temple of the Bright Mother who blessed the crops and performed funeral rites for the dead. Itano was not invited to the council. He wasn't offended. He was an apprentice with no surname. His job was to forge, not to sit in council. Aylin presented the plan herself. He waited in the smithy. Haldor worked in silence. Tim was cutting blanks for bolts. 3 hours later, a messenger arrived. The Baroness orders you to come. He came. The hall was quiet. The council members' faces were all different. Sir Bran was red-faced and angry. Oswald the miller was pale. Greta had her lips pressed together. Priest Thomas was calm. Aylin stood by the window. Aylin turned to him. Master Ethan, the council has questions. Sir Bran spoke first, loudly, forcefully. He said the plan was delusional, that there were no peasants with crossbows, that a crossbow was a weapon, and weapons were a knight's business, that giving weapons to the rabble meant undermining order, that if the peasants learned to shoot, the next step would be for them to start shooting at their lords. Ethan listened. Then he replied calmly. Sir Bran, when the horde comes to the walls, it won't care who's a knight and who's a peasant. It will devour everyone. You have 4 guards and 2 knights. The horde has 2,000 beasts. If you don't arm the townspeople, there will be no one left to defend the walls. Sir Bran flushed. He wanted to say something, but Greta cut him off. She asked about the money. How much would the plan cost? Iron, wood, food for the workers. Where to get it? Ethan gave the figures. He'd calculated them the day before. Some iron could be obtained by melting down old items. Unneeded plows, broken wheels, rusty chains. Every house has a few pounds of useless iron. The forest is nearby, a grove on the southern slope. Chop it down and haul it away, free except for the labor. Food. That's where it gets trickier. 120 people not working in the fields means a smaller harvest. But if the city falls, no one will need the harvest. Greta was silent. Then she nodded. Harsh, but logical. Miller Oswald spoke softly. He asked if they could do without the moat. A moat is a lot of work. No, the moat is the first line of defense. Without the moat, the beast will reach the wall in seconds. With the moat, it will slow down. Every second of delay is one crossbow bolt. One bolt means one dead creature. Priest Thomas remained silent throughout the council. Then he spoke a single sentence. The Light Mother teaches that a person's hands are her gift. If a master's hands save people, then it is the Mother's will. Ethan looked at the priest. The old man looked at him calmly, and in his eyes there was understanding. Not even approval. Understanding. Aylin summed it up. The plan is approved. Work begins tomorrow. Sir Bran stood up and left, slamming the door. The others dispersed quietly. Aylin held Ethan back. Bran will interfere. I know. He thinks you're undermining his authority. I'm undermining his worldview. That's worse. Aylin smiled slightly. It was the first time he'd seen her smile. Brief, quick, like a flash. It vanished immediately, but he remembered it. Work began the next day. Aylin announced a mobilization. Every household would provide one person for the construction. Every household would turn in scrap metal. Those who couldn't provide a person or metal would provide food for the workers. The people grumbled, but obeyed. Aylin knew how to speak to people. Not to command, to speak. She went from house to house personally. She explained to everyone. She showed everyone a map. She told everyone the distance to the horde. People turned pale. But they took up shovels and axes. Ethan divided up the work. They dug the trench on the eastern side. The terrain was flat there, and the enemy would come from that direction. 50 diggers. Tim was in charge. Ethan taught him how to mark the trench line using a rope and stakes. Depth, width, angle of the walls. Tim was a quick learner. Carpenters repaired the wall. Ethan drew up specifications for each section. Log length, diameter, fastening method. He forged the staples himself, standard ones, using a template. 20 pieces an hour. Haldor watched this and said nothing. Then one evening he said, "You're not a blacksmith." Ethan looked up. "A blacksmith makes things. You make it so that others make things. That's something else. I don't know the word for it. Engineer." "What?" "That's what they call it where I'm from. Engineer. A person who builds systems." Haldor tried the word out in his tongue. Engineer. He rolled it around. He nodded. "All right. Engineer. I like that." By the end of the first week, the moat was a third of the way done. The wall was a quarter patched up. And then Sora arrived. She came with a trade caravan, small, thin, short-haired, wearing men's clothes that didn't fit, a bag on her back. Everything she owned was in that bag. The caravan driver said he'd picked her up on the road 3 days' journey away. She was walking alone, on foot. She entered the gates of Dornholm, and the first thing she saw was a guard on the wall with a crossbow. She stopped. She watched. The guard was training, raising the crossbow, aiming at the target, shooting, reloading, shooting again. Sora stood and watched for 5 minutes. Then she asked a passerby, "What kind of weapon is that?" "A crossbow." "Who made it?" "A blacksmith." "A new one." "Ethan." An hour later, she was standing in the doorway of the blacksmith shop. Ethan looked up from the anvil, a little girl in dirty clothes with burning eyes. "You're the one who makes these things." "What things?" "The ones that shoot." "Crossbows?" "Yes." "Teach me how to shoot." Ethan looked at her hands, small but sinewy, at her shoulders, narrow, at her face, stubborn. "Who are you?" "Sora Khan. I came from the east. My caravan was attacked. I walked here. I saw the horde's creatures. They killed my people. I want to shoot." Ethan looked at her for another second. Then he nodded toward the bench. Sit down. Eat. Then we'll talk. Brenna brought her food. Sora ate greedily and quickly, like someone who hadn't eaten in 2 days. Then she looked up. So you'll teach me. First, tell me what you saw. Sora told him. A caravan of 12 wagons. Merchants carrying fabrics and spices were traveling from the capital eastward toward the border garrisons. They never made it. 2 days' journey from Caravan, the creatures attacked them. At night, silently, black, fast, the size of a large dog but on 2 legs, claws like sickles, and eyes, yellow, without pupils. The caravan's guard, 5 mercenaries with swords, held out for 3 minutes. One of the mercenaries was a mage. He cast a fireball. The creature took it in the chest and didn't stop. The fire had no effect. The mage was the second to die. Sora ran. She ran for 3 days, without food, without water, through the forest, alone. Ethan listened in silence. The fire didn't work. Immunity to magic. He knew that from conversations in the tavern, but rumors are one thing and eyewitness accounts are another. The creatures are immune to magic. That means mages are useless against them. So we need something else. Iron and steel. Bolts and traps. What he does. He looked at Sora. You want to shoot? Yes. Then you'll train, every day, starting in the morning. But first, you'll help me. With what? You've seen the creatures up close. Tell me everything. Size, speed, how they move, where their weak spots are. Sora told him everything she could remember. Ethan wrote it all down on the boards. Height about 1.2 meters, weight about 60 kilograms. They run on 2 legs, fast, faster than a horse in a short burst. Their hide is tough, dark, almost black. Their blood is black. Claws as long as a finger. Eyes are yellow. They react to sound and movement. They see better at night than during the day. Weak spots. Sora saw a mercenary stab one in the throat with a spear, and it fell. The throat. Thin skin. And another thing. The mercenary slashed the second one's legs below the knee. The creature fell. Thin legs. Ethan looked at his notes. Fast, immune to magic, tough hide, but a vulnerable throat and thin legs. A crossbow bolt with an armor-piercing tip will pierce the hide. A wire trap at knee level will sever the legs. Slingshots will slow them down. A moat will stop them. Everything he'd built was right, but he needed more. Faster. He opened the panel. Workshop, level 4. Experience 58 out of 300. Level 5 and the trap category were still far off. He needed to speed things up. He looked at Sora. She was sitting on a bench, watching him, waiting. Come by tomorrow morning. You'll get a crossbow. Your own. Tailored to your hand. Sora smiled. For the first time since they'd started talking, the smile was sharp and vicious and joyful all at once. Sora received her crossbow on the 3rd day. Ethan didn't give her a standard one. He watched how she held the test model and saw. Her hands were too small for a stock. Her grip was weak. Her shoulders were narrow. The recoil would knock the sight off. He made her a different one. The stock was a 1/3 shorter. The bow was slightly softer. The handle was thinner. The butt was fitted to her shoulder. It weighed 1.5 pounds less than the standard one. Sora took it in her hands and froze. She looked at Ethan. It's as if it's mine. It's yours, no one else's. She shot every day. In the morning before work on the wall, in the evening after. For the first 3 days, she missed more often than she hit the target. On the 4th day, she hit 5 out of 10. On the 10th day, 8 out of 10. On the 20th day, Ethan set up a target 100 paces away. Sora put all 10 bolts into a circle the size of a head. The guards stood and watched, silently. Then the senior guard, Volt, approached Ethan and said quietly, "The girl shoots better than I do." Ethan nodded. "Yeah." Volt paused. "It's good she's on our side." Meanwhile, the city was changing. The moat was growing. By the end of the 3rd week of work, the eastern side was ready. 2 meters deep, 3 meters wide. At the bottom, sharpened ash stakes. In front of the moat, 3 rows of palisades, the stakes driven into the ground at an angle. Any creature running toward the wall would first run into the palisades. It would slow down. Then it would fall into the moat. At the bottom, the stakes. Those that didn't die in the moat wouldn't be able to climb out quickly. And on the wall, crossbowmen. The wall was growing stronger. Carpenters replaced the rotten logs with fresh ones. Ethan made steel brackets for the joints. The system showed the optimal layout. Every bracket was in its designated spot. The wall was stronger than it had been when it was built 30 years ago. Haldor had reforged the gate himself. New hinges, new bolts, iron strips across the gate leaves. The old man worked silently and fiercely. He didn't say why, but Ethan saw. Haldor knew about the Horde. He'd known for a long time, and he'd waited his whole life for it to reach his doorstep. Now the moment had come, and instead of fear, he felt the fierce focus of a master doing the last work of his life and wanting to do it well. There were 20 crossbows. Ethan forged and assembled them. Tim helped. Sora helped. Even Finn helped. An 8-year-old boy in a prosthetic boot stood at the workbench, sanding the stocks with an emery stone. Brenna saw this and didn't stop him. She understood. The city was preparing for war, and there were no children in this city. There were only people, young and old. Ethan had reached level 4 by the end of the 3rd week of construction. The crossbows were a major breakthrough. Mass-produced. Each made to a template, but each individually fitted. The system awarded 20 points per crossbow, plus brackets for the walls, plus stakes for the moat. The panel displayed the total. Workshop, level 4. Experience 0 out of 300. 300 points to level 5. To traps. To real traps. He did the math. If he made crossbows, it would take 15 of them to reach level 5. 3 weeks. Too long. He needed something more complex. He opened the advanced metalworking category, looked at the blueprints, found it. A lock with a spring mechanism. A complex thing, lots of parts, lots of precision work. The system estimated 35 units per piece. 10 locks, and he'd be at level 5. He went to Greta, the market overseer. He explained, "Locks, reliable ones, with springs, can't be opened without a key. We need them. For every granary, for every warehouse, every house where grain is stored. If the Horde comes, and if the city holds out, then after the siege, they'll need to eat, which means the supplies need to be preserved, from looters, from panic, from hungry hands that, in fear, will carry everything off in a single night." Greta listened. Then she nodded. 30 locks. I'll send a list of doors. I'll start with 10. Ethan worked on the locks at night. By day, the wall and the crossbows. By night, the locks. Haldor grumbled. Brenna grumbled. Sora said outright that he was an idiot and would collapse. He didn't collapse. The body he inhabited was young and strong, 25 years old, muscles accustomed to hard work. He simply wouldn't let himself stop. He finished the 10th lock on the 4th day. The panel flashed. Workshop, level 5, new category, traps and defensive mechanisms. He opened the category, and his breath caught in his throat. The blueprints unfolded, one after another. A snare trap. Triggers when the victim touches the wire. The mechanism strikes with a sharpened rod at chest level. A leg trap. Spring-loaded steel jaws. Grabs the leg. Won't let go. A falling grate, a wooden frame with iron spikes, held in place by a rope. The rope is cut or burned through. The frame falls. It blocks the passage. A crossbow. A crossbow mounted on a stand, triggered by a tension wire. It fires without a person. This was exactly what he needed. Not people on the walls. Mechanisms. Systems that operate on their own. Every trap is a fighter that never tires, never sleeps, never fears, and never misses. He started with the automatic crossbows, the most complex design. A crossbow on a rotating mount. The trigger mechanism is connected to a tension wire. The creature touches the wire pulls the lever strikes the trigger, the crossbow fires. The bolt flies, the creature falls. He assembled the first prototype in 2 days. He set it up in the blacksmith's yard. He stretched the wire. He called Tim. Tim, walk over there. Master, the wire is right there. Stay below the wire. Crouch and walk through. Tim walked through. Nothing happened. Now go around and walk through standing up straight. Tim walked around. He went. His foot hit the wire. Click. A whistle. The bolt struck the sandbag that Ethan had hung in place of a potential target. The bag burst. Sand poured onto the ground. Tim stood as white as a sheet. It shoots on its own. Yes, without a person. Tim swallowed. Sora walked over. She looked at the bag, at the hole from the bolt, at the mechanism. How many of these can you put on the walls? A lot. Depends on the material. Ethan looked at the burst sandbag. The system showed the self-firing accuracy at 30 paces. Excellent. At 50 paces. Good. At 100 paces. Low. So place them on the walls and in the passageways. Close combat. Range up to 50 paces. Beyond that, people with crossbows take over. He sketched out a layout. 12 automatic crossbows on the eastern wall. 8 in the alleys behind the gates. If the enemy breaks through the gates, they'll walk into a corridor of crossbows. Every step is a bolt. Every bolt is a creature. Aylin came to look at the crossbow. She stood and watched as Ethan demonstrated. The trigger wire, the lever, the trigger, the bolt, the bag with a hole. Then she asked quietly, "How many creatures will this stop? If there are 2,000 of them, 20 crossbows, 1 shot each, that's 20 creatures. Then reloading, a long reload. But the first volley will be unexpected. The creature doesn't know what a crossbow is, doesn't expect it, doesn't dodge. 20 dead creatures in the first 10 seconds, plus 40 crossbowmen on the wall. At 3 shots per minute, 120 bolts per minute. Aylin calculated in her head. Ethan saw her calculating, quickly, precisely. She was smart, truly smart. 120 bolts per minute is 2,000 in 20 minutes, if every shot hits. Not every shot will hit. Half, maybe a third. That means an hour, maybe an hour and a half, if we have enough bolts. How many bolts do we need? Thousands. He didn't give her the exact number. She had already turned pale, but her voice was steady. I'll give you 2 more blacksmiths, from the neighboring villages. Ethan nodded. Aylin left. He remained standing in the courtyard next to the crossbow and the burst sack, thinking. Thousands of bolts. 20 crossbows. 40 crossbows. A moat. Catapults. A wall. Would it be enough? He didn't know. But there was no other plan. 2 blacksmiths from neighboring villages arrived 3 days later. The first was Mark. Young, about 25. Quiet. Skilled, but lacking spark. He did what he was told, nothing more. The second was Eric. Older, about 40. Bearded. With an opinion. He looked at the crossbow and said it was the devil's work, and he wouldn't do it. Ethan looked at him. Then, silently, he took the crossbow and shot at a target 100 paces away. He hit it. He looked at Eric. The devil's work is when a horde beast rips your guts out with its claws. This is a tool that won't let that happen. Choose. Rick made his choice. 2 days later, he was forging bolts faster than Mark. His hands remembered the hammer, and his doubts vanished when he saw how the template system worked. Identical bolts. Dozens. Hundreds. An assembly line. 3 blacksmiths and Haldor. 4 anvils. 4 forges. 2 shifts. Morning and evening. Ethan didn't forge bolts himself. He did what was more important. He taught. He demonstrated. He set up gauges and checked quality. Every bolt passed through his hands. The quality control system rejected the defective ones. A micro crack in the tip. A crooked shank. Poor hardening. Defects set aside. For remelting. Only the good ones went to the arsenal. By the end of the first week, they had 500 bolts. By the end of the second, 1,000. By the end of the third week, 1,500. Ethan was counting. 2,000 bolts. If a third of the bolts are usable, that means they need 6,000, plus a reserve, 8,000. They had 1,500. Not enough. We need to go faster. He improved the forging tool. The new template allowed the tip to be forged in 4 blows instead of 8. Productivity doubled. At the same time, he was building crossbows, 12 for the eastern wall. Everyone assembled their own. He tested each one. He sighted each one in. Tim helped. In 2 months, the boy had gone from a clueless teenager to a skilled assistant. He read blueprints. He understood tolerances. He could assemble the trigger mechanism himself. Ethan looked at him and thought, there, that's what all this is for. Not crossbows, not traps. Tim, a man who is learning, who takes knowledge and makes it his own. 1 Tim is worth 10 crossbows, because a crossbow fires once, but Tim will be making crossbows for the rest of his life. In the 3rd week of the 3rd month, 2 events occurred. The first. Aelin brought a woman to him, a tall woman in a men's travel coat, with a bag on her shoulder from which scrolls were sticking out, glasses on her nose, strange ones, thick lenses in dark metal frames, homemade, lenses made of rock crystal. Ethan looked at the glasses and became curious. This is Leanne O'Reilly, a scholar, a natural philosopher. She wants to see your work. Leanne extended her hand. Ethan shook it. A small hand, but a firm grip. Leanne looked at him through her thick lenses, and in her eyes was something he recognized immediately. Hunger. Not physical, intellectual. She wanted to know. She wanted to understand. Show me everything. He showed her. Crossbows, self-firing arrows, traps, conductors, templates. He couldn't show her the quality control system, but he showed her the result. Identical bolts, standard parts, interchangeability. He explained, and Leanne listened. She didn't just listen, she understood. She asked questions that made his eyebrows rise. Why was the bow made of laminated steel rather than solid steel? Because laminated steel dampens vibration better. Leanne nodded. Just like the multi-layered hardening of swords by the masters of Caravan. Exactly. You know about multi-layered hardening? I've studied it. Ethan looked at her intently. She was the first person in this world with whom he could speak his own language. Not literally, but in the language of systems thinking. She saw connections. She saw the principles behind things. They talked until late into the night. He told her about levers, about pulleys, about moments of force, about how to calculate the load on a beam, about why an arch holds more than a straight lintel. Leanne took notes. She filled 12 sheets of parchment. Her hands were covered in ink up to her elbows. Her eyes were ablaze. At some point, she stopped. She looked up. Ethan, this isn't a craft. It's a science. Yes, but that word doesn't exist here. Now it does. She left in the morning, said she'd be back in a week. She returned in 3 days, with a cart full of books and tools, said she'd stay. For a long time. Maybe forever. Aelin set aside a room for her in the castle. Leon set it up as a laboratory. Shelves with samples, a table with scales, lenses, flasks, notes from floor to ceiling. She began to systematize everything Ethan knew and could explain. She wrote down formulas, drew diagrams, translated his terms into the local language. A first-class lever became a long arm. A moment of force became a weight of rotation. Pressure became a weight on the palm. Rough, inaccurate, but understandable to people who had never heard the word physics. The second event occurred on the same day that Leanne returned. At night, the granary caught fire. A large 3-story granary at the edge of the market square. Grain for the winter. The entire town's supply. Ethan woke up to a scream. He ran out into the street. The barn was ablaze. The fire was coming from below. Someone had knocked over an oil lamp or set it on fire on purpose. People were running around with buckets. A chain from the well. The well was 100 paces away. The buckets were small. Useless. The fire devoured the dry wood faster than 10 men could haul water. People were screaming inside. 2 children. The Miller Oswald's daughters. They'd been playing in the barn and fell asleep. The door was jammed. The fire cut off their escape. Oswald stood in front of the burning door and pounded at it with his fists. He was screaming. His face was frantic. Ethan stopped. He looked at the fire, at the well, at the people with buckets, at the rainwater barrel by the wall of the neighboring house. 20 minutes. He had 20 minutes, maybe less. He ran to the smithy, grabbed the tools, came back. On the way, he shouted to Tim, who was already on his feet. "Bring the barrel here, the leather hoses from the smithy, all of them. The copper pipe I set aside yesterday, hurry up." Tim ran off. Ethan got to work. The system unfolded in his head. A piston pump, the simplest kind. A cylinder, a piston, 2 valves, inlet and outlet. The barrel as a reservoir, the hose as a sleeve. He cut and bent the copper pipe right on the ground, with pliers and a hammer. A piston made of a wooden block covered in leather. Valves made of leather scraps with copper washers. Rough. Crooked. But physics knows no beauty. Physics knows pressure. Tim dragged the barrel, leather hoses, the pipe. Ethan connected them. His hands were shaking, but not from fear, from the speed. 18 minutes, maybe less. The pump was ready in 17. An ugly contraption, a barrel, a copper cylinder, a wooden piston, a leather hose, a handle for pumping. Pour water into the barrel. People stood and watched. They didn't understand. Tim was the first to grab a bucket and splash it into the barrel. Then a second, a third. The barrel filled up. Ethan grabbed the handle. He pumped. The piston went down. Water gushed into the hose. It shot out of the nozzle. A jet. Tight. Powerful. 15 meters. He aimed it at the barn. The water hit the fire. Steam. Hissing. The fire retreated. Pump. 4 men lined up at the handle. They pumped in pairs, taking turns. The jet pounded relentlessly. Ethan aimed the hose. Sora held the nozzle. Tim added water. The fire fought back. The fire didn't want to retreat, but the water was stronger. The water and the pressure and the copper pipe and the leather piston. In 10 minutes, the flames were brought down. In 15, they were extinguished. They broke down the barn door with an axe. Inside, on the second floor, 2 girls were sitting, alive, covered in soot, terrified, but alive. Oswald carried them out in his arms. He sat down on the ground in the middle of the square. He held them close. He cried. A grown man sat in the mud and cried. And the 2 girls cried with him, and no one looked because everyone was crying. Aylin stood nearby. She had come while the fire was still burning. She held one of the girls. Then she handed her to her father. She stood there and looked at Ethan, at the barrel, at the pump, at the hose from which water was still dripping. She looked at him the way no one had ever looked at anyone before. Ethan didn't see it. He sat on the ground next to the pump and breathed. His hands were burned. His face was covered in soot. His knees were shaking. Brenna approached. She sat down silently beside him. She took his hands. She began to apply ointment. Sora stood with a crossbow behind her back and watched the smoldering barn. Haldor was the last to approach. He looked at the pump. He looked at Ethan. He said nothing. He simply placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed. The next day, the first fire brigade arrived in Dornholm. 10 men, 2 pumps. Ethan assembled the second one that day from spare parts. Aylin appointed the captain. Volt, the senior guard. Reliable. Drills once a week. Ethan wrote instructions on a board and hung it by the well. What to do in case of fire, where to run, who to call, where the pumps are. People read it. Some couldn't read, so Ethan drew pictures. Simple, clear. A little man running toward a barrel, a little man pumping the handle, water spraying out. Oswald came to the smithy that evening. Silently, he placed a purse on the workbench. Heavy. Ethan opened it. Gold. A lot. More than he had seen in this world in all 3 months. No need. I must. My daughters are alive. Name your price. There is no price. The pump costs a barrel and a copper pipe. I've already spent that. Oswald was silent. Then he asked, How can I repay you? Ethan thought, Iron. I need iron. A lot. As much as you can get. And coal. Charcoal for the forge. Tons of it. Oswald nodded. 3 days later, 4 wagons pulled up to the smithy. Iron, coal, and a barrel of honey on top, with a note. For the master, from Oswald. Ethan stood and looked at the wagons. So much iron. So much coal. With this, he could forge for a month without stopping. Thousands of bolts. Dozens of crossbows. Crossbows. Traps. He opened the panel. Workshop. Level 5. Experience 245 out of 500. The pump gave 40 points. A complex item under extreme conditions. The system assessed it. Good. He looked up at the sky. Evening. A red sun. His 3rd month in this world. The city was changing. People were changing. He was changing. He had no time to think about it. But sometimes, in the evening, when the forge emptied and the furnace burned out, he sat alone and looked at his hands. Strangers. Calloused. Scorched. Strong. His hands. Already his. In the 4th month, Una arrived, a military mage healer, detached to the Dornholm garrison from the capital, an order from the Eastern Front Command, one healer for every border town. Una Park arrived on horseback, accompanied by a single soldier, the Academy's uniform cloak, dark blue with silver embroidery, hair pulled back straight, face impassive. She dismounted at the gate and presented her papers to the guard. The guard, with a crossbow slung over his shoulder, escorted her to the Baroness. Ethan saw her from a distance. A mage. A real mage. The first one he'd seen up close. He sensed something. He didn't see it. He felt it, as if the air around her were slightly denser, slightly warmer. The system flashed. Mana source detected. Analysis impossible. Incompatible energy type. He closed the notification. Una met with Aelin, then she walked around the city, then she came to the smithy. She stood in the doorway and looked. At the crossbows on the walls, at the crossbow in the courtyard, at the blueprints, at the bolts in the boxes, at Haldor by the forge, at Tim at the workbench, at Ethan with a hammer in his hand. Master Cross. Ethan looked up. She knew his last name. Aelin had told her. Or the soldier. It didn't matter. Master Park. She raised an eyebrow slightly. You know my name. The Baroness warned me you were coming. Una entered. She walked through the smithy. She touched the crossbows. She looked at the blueprints. She picked up bolts and weighed them in her hand, silently. Then she turned. I was told you armed the peasants. I trained the archers. You gave weapons to people without rank and without the right to bear arms. I gave tools to people who will defend their families. Una looked at him. Her eyes were cold. Not malice. Cold. Professional detachment. She was a soldier. She thought in terms of regulations, subordination, and law. Peasants with weapons were a violation of order in her world. You know that in Velmara, the law forbids commoners from possessing long-range weapons. I know that in 3 months the Horde will be here, and the law won't stop a single one of those beasts. Una was silent. Then she nodded. Briefly. Dryly. She turned and walked away. Ethan watched her go. Haldor grumbled from the corner. Cold. Military. She'll get used to it. Ethan wasn't sure, but he had no time for Una. There was too much work to do. The crossbows on the eastern wall, 12 of them, set up, calibrated, each aimed at its own sector. The firing zones overlap, no blind spots. 8 crossbows in the alleys behind the gates, set up, tripwires laid, marked, so our own men don't trip over them. At night, the wires are taken down. In the morning, they're put up. 32 crossbows, 27 trained archers. 5 more are still training. Sora leads the training. She's become an instructor. A small, fierce girl who can hit a target at 150 paces and never misses. The archers listen to her, because she's the best. 4,000 bolts. Not enough. We need 8,000. The blacksmiths are working. 300 a day. Ethan checks every batch. 20% are defective. Too many. It needs to be lowered. He refined the conductor once more. The defect rate dropped to 10%. Leanne helped. She wrote everything down. Every drawing, every formula, every process. She created something that didn't exist in this world. A textbook. Technical documentation. If Ethan died, his knowledge wouldn't die with him. It would be in Leanne's book, on the shelves, in the hands of students. That was more important than any crossbow. One night, the two of them sat in the smithy. Leanne was writing, Ethan was sketching. Quietly. Only the scratch of the pen and the rustle of charcoal on the board. Leanne looked up. Ethan. Yes. How do you know all this? He looked at her, a small woman in huge glasses, ink on her fingers and nose. Her hair had come loose from its bun, eyes tired but burning. From another world. She froze. Then she slowly put down the pen. Explain. He explained. Not everything, but enough. That there is a place where this knowledge is commonplace, where every child knows that the earth is round and that bodies fall with uniform acceleration, where bridges are made of steel and houses of glass, and people fly through the sky in metal machines. Liane listened, without interrupting, without uttering a sound. She listened as a scientist listens to a hypothesis, attentively and critically. Then she asked, "Can you prove it?" He picked up 2 bolts from the table, different sizes. He held them out at arm's length. He let them go at the same time. Both hit the floor at the same moment. Objects of different masses fall with the same acceleration. This can be tested, repeated. It's not magic. It's a law. Liane picked up the bolts. She held them. She put them down. Then she looked up at him, and in those eyes was something that made him uneasy. Not fear, not distrust. Delight. Quiet. Deep. The delight of a person who had searched their whole life and found it. "Teach me everything." He nodded. From that night on, they worked together, every evening. Ethan explained. Liane took notes, argued, checked. She was brilliant. She grasped concepts in minutes. She drew conclusions that he himself hadn't immediately seen. A week later, she proposed an idea that made him stop. "Ethan, if the air pressure in the pump hose creates a jet, then the steam pressure in a closed vessel can move a piston." He stared at her. She had just invented a steam engine. From first principles. In a week. It had taken him a year in college. Yes, maybe, theoretically. In practice, it's difficult. Very difficult. But yes. Liane smiled. For the first time, broadly and openly. He decided. When the systems level allowed it, and when he had time, he would make something for her. Not a steam engine, something smaller, but more important. In the 5th month, what he had been waiting for and fearing happened. Scouts. 3 guards were patrolling the road to the east. They came running back. Their faces were ashen. Tracks. On the road, 5 miles from the city. Creature tracks. Not a pack, a scouting party. 3 or 4 individuals. They came, they looked, they left. Ethan stood on the wall and looked east. Fields, a forest on the horizon. Somewhere out there in the forest, 3 or 4 creatures with yellow eyes were watching his city and committing it to memory. They would return, with friends. Aylin stood beside him, silent. Then she asked, "We're ready." "No, but we will be." "How much more time do we need?" "A month, 2, as much as we get." She nodded, turned and walked away. Back straight, step steady. He knew that behind that straight back lay terror, but she walked steadily, and he respected her for that more than for anything else. That evening, Una came to the smithy, for the 2nd time. She stood in the doorway and watched. Ethan was working on a trap. Steel jaws, a spring, a complex mechanism, precision work. He looked up. "Master Park?" She paused. Then she came in. She walked over to the workbench. She looked at the trap. "It's for the beasts." "Yes." "It'll kill them?" "No. It'll hold them back. It'll injure their leg. It'll slow them down. They're fast. Every second counts." Una looked at the trap, then at his hands, then at him. "You're an engineer." The word sounded foreign on her lips. She'd heard it from Liane, or from Aylin. "Yes. Magic doesn't work on the creatures. I know. They're immune. My fire shield is useless. My healing spells only work on people. I'm useless against the Horde." Her voice was steady, but he heard it. Beneath the steadiness, despair. A healing mage at war with an enemy that cannot be killed by magic. 15 years of training wasted. You're not useless. Yuna looked at him sharply. A healer is always needed. People will be wounded. They will die. They need someone to stop the bleeding and mend the bones. That's you. She was silent. Then she said quietly, "My mana reserve is small. I can heal 10 people a day." Then nothing. Then a day to recover. 10. But there will be dozens of wounded. Ethan set the trap on the workbench. He looked at her. Wait. He went up to the attic. He returned with a board. There was a drawing on the board. A clamp. A surgical clamp. Steel jaws. A spring. A latch. A simple thing. In his world, it's 200 years old. Here, it doesn't exist. It's a clamp. You place it on a blood vessel. It stops the bleeding. No magic. Steel and a spring. Yuna took the board. She looked at the drawing. For a long time. Then she looked up. You can do this. Yes. And not just that. Scalpels. Thin. Sharper than a razor. Tweezers. Magnifying glasses. Holders. Anything that lets you do with your hands what you lack the mana for. Yuna stood there, the drawing board in her hands, and something in her face cracked. It didn't break, it cracked. Like ice on a river in early spring. A small crack, but you could see the water through it. Why are you doing this? Because in 3 months there will be a battle here. And every living person after that battle will be here, because someone did their job. You'll do yours. I'll make you the tools for it. Yuna placed the board on the workbench, carefully. She turned around. She left. She turned back at the door. Thank you, Master Cross. Not Ethan. Still Master Cross for now. But it was more than the coldness with which she had come the first time. Ethan watched her go and thought, a mage who had been taught that magic solves everything, and an engineer who had been taught that knowledge solves everything. They were both right, and both were wrong. It is the person who decides, with their hands, with their head, with their tools. He returned to the trap. Finished the spring, tested it. The jaws snapped shut with such force that the wooden block split in 2. Good. That'll be enough for the creature. Haldi arrived in her 6th month. Small, 17 by human standards. No one counts by dwarven standards. Broad shoulders, short, strong arms, a round, serious face. Dark red hair braided into 4 plaits. A knapsack on her back, a hammer on her belt. Not a blacksmith's, a miner's, for working stone and ore. She entered the smithy. She looked at Haldor, at the bellows, at the anvil, at the crossbows on the wall, at the blueprints, at Ethan. And she bowed, low, her forehead almost touching the floor. Master Ethan, I am Haldi of the Torgrim clan, the former clan. I was cast out. I have heard of you. Teach me. Ethan stood with a hammer in his hand, looking at the dwarf girl who stood before him in a bow. Stand up. Haldi straightened up. Her eyes were dark, shining. In them were fear and hope and something else. Despair. She had come to the last door and knew that if this door closed, there would be nowhere left to go. Why were you expelled? I proposed a new method of tempering to the elders. They said that our ancestors' tempering was sacred and that changing it was an insult. I said our ancestors wouldn't mind improvements. They said I was no longer part of the clan. Ethan looked at her. A gnome who had been cast out for wanting to make things better, for innovation, for the very same reason Garm hates him, for the very same reason archmages fear engineers, for the very same reason that 1,000 years ago the mages of Aelion destroyed civilization in the eastern wastes. Fear old for the new. Show me your hands. Haldi held out her palms. Different calluses, not from a blacksmith's hammer, from a miner's and stonecutter's hammer. A different school, a different tradition. Show me what you can do. He handed her a piece of iron and pointed to the anvil. Haldi took the tongs. She thrust the iron into the forge. She waited. She pulled it out and began to forge. Ethan watched. The blows were different, not like Haldor's, not like his own. Dwarven forging. Frequent, short strikes. The hammer barely lifts, but every strike is precise to the fraction of a millimeter. She wasn't shaping the metal. She was coaxing it. 3 minutes later, a nail lay before her. Perfect. Even. Not a single hammer mark on the head. Haldor approached. He took the nail. He turned it. He raised an eyebrow. Good. Ethan nodded. Good. But I need to know more than just what you can do. I need to know what you know. Haldor knew a lot. Dwarven metallurgy was ancient and profound. They knew alloys that humans didn't know. They knew how to work with ores that humans considered useless. They tempered steel in ways that Ethan couldn't replicate using the system, because the system relied on his knowledge, and he didn't know that. Haldi told him about a pit, a hardening method in which the metal is heated not from above, but from below, slowly, evenly. Carbon is distributed throughout the entire volume. The steel becomes stronger and more flexible at the same time. Ethan listened, and the system recorded. New data, new parameters. He could literally feel his knowledge base expanding. It was unexpected. The system didn't just organize his knowledge. It could integrate new knowledge from other masters, from other traditions. Haldi became the third apprentice, after Tim and Sora, but a special apprentice. Tim was the hands, Sora was the eyes, Haldi was the brain. She asked questions that made Ethan stop and think. Master, why do you make a spring from round wire and not from square wire? Because a round cross-section distributes the load better when twisted. What if we made the cross-section oval? Ethan fell silent. He looked at her, then at the spring, then at the system. An oval cross-section. The calculation. The torsional load for an oval cross-section, 12% better than a round one with the same material consumption. He looked at Haldi. You're right. Haldi didn't smile, but her ears turned red. Gnomes blush through their ears. Ethan remembered that. Haldi's first week in the forge changed a lot. The bolts got better. Haldi suggested heat-treating pit firing for the tips. The result? Puncture resistance increased by 20%. Same bolt, same materials, different treatment. 20%. This meant that a bolt that used to get stuck in the creature's hide now pierced right through. The crossbow limbs became more reliable. Haldi a method of multi-layered forging in which layers of steel and iron alternate. The bow springs more powerfully and does not break under overload. Ethan knew about Damascus steel, but the gnome's method was different. Thinner, more precise, better. He taught Haldi engineering thinking. She taught him metallurgy. An exchange. Equal. Fair. Haldor watched this, and one evening said, "For 30 years I thought I knew everything about metal. Then you came along, and I realized I knew half. Now she has come, and I realize I know a quarter." The old man smiled. It's a good thing I don't have long left. I won't have time to realize I know nothing. Ethan looked at him. Haldor, you'll live another 20 years. Haldor snorted. I'll live to see the end of this story, and that's enough. In the 7th week of the 6th month, Ethan finished assembling the surgical instruments for Una. 12 items. 3 clamps of various sizes, 2 scalpels, one with a straight blade, one with a curved one, forceps, a magnifying glass on a movable stand, surgical scissors with blunt tips so as not to damage the tissue, a suture needle with an eye and a bend, a hook for spreading the edges of a wound, a retractor, and a case. Leather, with compartments for each instrument. He brought the set to the infirmary. Una was standing at the table, bandaging a guard who had cut himself during training. She saw Ethan. She saw the case. He set it on the table and opened it. Una fell silent. Her bandage-wrapped hands froze in midair. She stared at the instruments. Slowly, she set the bandage aside. She picked up the forceps, squeezed, unclenched. The jaws closed with pinpoint precision. The spring was soft. The lock was secure. She picked up the scalpel. She ran her finger along the blade, sharper than a razor. She picked up the magnifying glass. She looked through it at her palm. The lines on her skin were magnified. Every detail was visible. She put each instrument back in its compartment, slowly, carefully, as if handling something fragile, although steel isn't fragile. Then she closed the case. She placed both palms on the leather and stood there, silently, for a long time. Ethan waited. Your mana is the pinnacle. Your hands are the foundation. You have the golden hands of Una. I simply made the right tools for them. She raised her head. Her eyes were shining. Not tears, something else. The ice on the river cracked wider. The water was clearly visible. Ethan. He blinked, for the first time. Not Master Cross. Ethan. Thank you. He nodded and left. He turned around in the doorway. She was standing there, holding the case with both hands pressed against her chest. The way you hold something very precious. In the evening, he returned to the smithy. Haldi was working at the forge. Tim was cutting blanks. Sora was cleaning her crossbow. Brenna brought dinner. Haldor sat on a bench drinking beer. Leanne was writing at the table. Ethan stood in the doorway watching them. They were all here, in his smithy, in his world. Each had come their own way, each with their own pain. Each had found here something they couldn't find outside. A place, a purpose, meaning. He walked in, sat down. Brenna silently set a bowl in front of him, porridge with meat, hot. He ate and listened as Haldi argued with Haldor about the tempering temperature of the steel. The old man was getting worked up. The dwarf stood her ground. Tim smiled. Sora sharpened a bolt and shook her head. Leanne recorded the argument because, to her, any argument was data. Brenna sat nearby, quiet, close. He felt the warmth of her shoulder. The panel flashed. Workshop, Level 6. Experience 120 out of 800. New category, Multi-Layer Armor. He opened it. The blueprints unfolded. Modular Armor, Brigantine, Lamellar Armor, Chainmail with Plate Reinforcement. Each blueprint included full specifications and a fastening system. Modularity. This meant the armor could be assembled from standard components, like a construction set. The The breastplate was separate, shoulder guards separately, arm guards separately, thigh guards separately. Each element is tailored to a specific person, but the base is standard. 20 sets a month instead of 2 a year. He looked at the blueprints and something clicked in his head. Crossbows gave the city teeth. Traps gave the city claws. Armor will give the city skin. An archer in armor stands on the wall and is not afraid. An archer without armor stands on the wall and trembles. The difference between victory and flight often lies not in the weapon, in confidence. He finished his porridge. He stood up. He walked over to the workbench. He took out a board and began sketching the first modular breastplate. Haldi approached. She looked over his shoulder. Silently, she took a second board and began sketching the fastening. Without words, without questions. She simply saw what he was doing and knew how to help. Ethan looked at her. She caught his gaze and her ears turned red again. He returned to the sketch. The night was long, but in the morning, a complete design for modular armor for the Dornholm garrison lay on the workbench. 30 sets. A month's work. If all the blacksmiths, if there's enough iron, if there's enough time, if... He looked out the window. Dawn. A pink sky. A quiet city. A sleeping city. His city. Enough. The first raid happened at dawn. Ethan woke up to the sound of a horn, a low, drawn-out sound he'd heard during training but never for real. Alarm. The eastern wall. He slid down from the attic, pulled on his boots, grabbed the spyglass he'd carved out for himself a month ago from 2 lenses and a brass casing, ran to the wall. There was already movement in the streets. Archers were running to their positions. Everyone knew their place. Everyone had trained dozens of times. Sora was the first on the wall. Her crossbow was loaded. Her eyes were narrowed. Her face was calm. She was 19, and she stood on the wall, waiting for the beasts that had killed her caravan. And she didn't tremble. Ethan climbed the tower, the highest point of the wall, a square platform 3 by 3 meters. You could see everything from here. The fields, the moat, the catapults, the eastern road stretching to the horizon. He raised his spyglass. He saw them. They were running. Black, fast, on 2 legs. Sora was right. The size of a large dog, but upright. Their claws glinted in the morning light. Yellow eyes. Even from a distance, he could see those eyes. He counted. 20, 30, 40, maybe 50. Not an army. Reconnaissance by combat. They wanted to check out the city, the walls, the defenses. Ethan lowered the flag. Red. Signal 1. Stand by. 32 crossbowmen froze on the wall. 12 crossbows on the eastern wall were cocked. Tripwires were stretched across the moat. Catapults were in position. The moat was full of stakes. The creatures were approaching. Fast. Very fast. Sora hadn't lied. Faster than a horse at a gallop. They ran in silence. No howling. No roaring. Silence. Only the pounding of dozens of feet on dry earth. It was worse than a scream. You can shout over a scream. You can't argue with silence. The first creature flew into the tripwires. A sharp stake pierced its chest. It jerked and fell. The second one jumped over. The third ran into the second row. The fourth went around and ran on, toward the moat. Ethan raised the yellow flag. Signal 2. The moat. The creature ran to the edge of the moat and didn't stop. It jumped. It didn't make it. 3 meters wide. The creature fell onto the spikes. Black blood gushed out. It was still twitching, but the stakes held it fast. Behind it came the second, the third. Some leaped over, long, strong legs. They landed on the other side and ran toward the wall. Ethan raised the green flag. Third signal. Fire. 32 crossbows fired simultaneously. A volley. A whistle. An impact. Bolts flew 50 paces and never missed. Not all hit their mark, but most did. The creatures fell, one after another. Bolts pierced their hides. Haldi was right. The pit yama, 20% strength. The bolt went right through. The crossbows on the wall fired when 3 creatures ran within 20 paces. Click. Whistle. Impact. 3 creatures fell simultaneously. A mechanism without a human. Without fear. Without a miss. Reload. The crossbowmen worked as Ethan had taught them. 3 seconds to reload. Goat's foot. Bowstring on the hook. Bolt in the groove. Sight. Release. Next. Sora shot faster than anyone. 2 bolts in 3 seconds. Every shot a hit. A small, fierce girl with a crossbow that was made for her. Just for her. The battle lasted 14 minutes. Ethan timed it with the hourglass standing on the tower platform. 14 minutes. Not a single creature made it to the wall. Not a single one climbed over. Not a single person was injured. 38 dead creatures lay on the field in front of the wall. 12 fell into the moat. 4 remained on the slings. The rest fled. Ethan didn't know how many had fled. A few. They ran back east, quickly, silently, just as they had come. Silence. Then someone on the wall screamed. One voice, followed by a second, a third. The wall was screaming. People were screaming. Peasants who 3 months ago didn't know how to hold a crossbow stood on the wall above the field of dead creatures and screamed. Not out of joy, out of relief. Out of the fact that they were alive and couldn't believe it. Ethan stood on the tower and didn't scream. He looked at the field, at the bodies, at the black blood. He counted. 38 killed. About 150 bolts used. 4 bolts per creature. Too many. We need to be more accurate. We need to train. We need to reduce the consumption to 2. He wrote it on the board. Bolt consumption. Trap efficiency. Shooter's reaction time. Everything that can be measured must be measured. Everything that is measured can be improved. Aylin climbed up the tower. She stood beside him. She looked out at the field. Not a single wounded. Not a single one. He looked at her. She was looking at him. And in her eyes was that very thing. The thing for which neither of them had words. He looked away first. It was a reconnaissance unit. The main wave would be different. Bigger. Stronger. Maybe large beasts. Sora said she'd seen big ones. Twice as tall as the usual ones. We need to keep preparing. Aylin nodded. They went down. People were standing in the square. Everyone was looking at them. At Aylin. At Ethan. Aylin stood up straight. Her voice was steady. Loud. Today, Dornholm stood its ground. Without magic. Without knights. You stood your ground. Archers, masters, the people of Dornholm, remember this day. Silence. Then Volt struck the wall with his crossbow. 1 strike. Followed by a second guard. Then a third. The square rumbled. The clang of crossbows against stone. a rhythm, one for all. Ethan stood and listened. Then he quietly went into the smithy. It was quiet there. The forge was burning. Haldor sat on a bench. He hadn't gone up to the wall. Old, one-eyed, but he had forged half the bolts that had killed the beasts today. Well then, we held out. We held out. Haldor nodded. He pulled a jug from under the bench, poured 2 mugs. They drank in silence. The beer was warm and bitter. Haldor set down his mug. They'll be back. Yeah, more of them. Yeah. Haldor paused. Then get up. Work awaits. Ethan stood up. He took the hammer and returned to the anvil. The panel showed Workshop, Level 7. Experience 340 out of 1,000. Level 8 is a long way off. Siege technology is a long way off. But closer than yesterday. After the first battle, the city had changed. People walked differently, more upright, louder. The fear hadn't gone anywhere, but something new had been added to it. Dignity. The peasant who stood on the wall with a crossbow and killed the beast no longer looks at the ground when a knight passes by. Sir Bran noticed this, and he didn't like it. He went to see Aelin. Ethan knew this from Tim, who had heard it from a messenger, who had heard it from the castle cook. A chain of gossip, faster than any messenger. Bran demanded that the crossbows be taken from the peasants. He demanded that order be restored. He demanded that weapons be only in the hands of those who were supposed to have them. Aelin refused. Bran slammed the door. Again. Ethan waited for the consequences. They came 3 days later. Not from Bran, from far away. A messenger on an exhausted horse galloped through the gates of Dornholm that evening. The horse collapsed at the tethers. The messenger handed the scroll to Aelin and fell unconscious. Una revived him an hour later. Aelin read the scroll. She went to the smithy. His face was pale. Kervin had fallen. Ethan set down his hammer. When? A week ago. The garrison had been wiped out. 20 men had survived. They were coming here. The horde was following them. How long? A month. Maybe a month and a half. Ethan closed his eyes. A month. He had a month before the main wave. 2,000 beasts, maybe more, against his walls and traps and crossbows. He opened his eyes. There's something else. Aelin held out a second scroll, a red wax seal. Ethan didn't know the coats of arms, but Aelin did. Count Warren. He was offering protection, in exchange for a vassal oath and the surrender of Ethan, the master blacksmith, to him. Ethan read it. Count Warren wanted him, personally, as property, as a tool, as a weapon. He looked at Aelin. She stood straight, hands at her sides, chin raised, fury in her eyes. Quiet. Cold. I refused. The messenger had already left. Ethan nodded. He knew Warren wouldn't accept refusal. It was a declaration of war. 2 wars at once. The horde from the east, Warren from the west. The city between them like a nut in a vice. He sat down on a bench. Aelin sat down beside him. They sat in silence. Then she said quietly, I won't give you up. I wasn't going to leave. She looked at him, quickly, then turned away. Ethan took out some boards. He began to sketch a new defense plan, now on 2 fronts. The eastern wall against the horde, the western wall against Warren. There's only one gate, from the east, so Warren will come from the west, over the wall. The wall on the west is weaker. He hadn't reinforced it because the threat was coming from the east. Now he needs to fortify everything. He needs level 8. Siege equipment, trebuchets, ballistas, catapults. Heavy weapons that will stop not only the beasts, but also men in armor. People with swords. Count Warren's men. The panel showed, level 7, experience 580 out of 1,000. 420 points to go until level 8. A lot. He did the math. Armor. Modular armor sets grant 30 points per set. 14 sets. He'd already made 12. 2 left. Plus something else. Something complicated. He thought for 2 days. Then he found the answer. A water wheel. Not that creaky wheel that turned Oswald's mill. A new one. With proper blades. With a transmission mechanism. With a shaft that could be connected to anything. To the forge's bellows. To the hammer. To the saw. Water power instead of muscle power. He drew up the plans for 3 days. Leanne helped with the calculations. Haldy advised on the materials. Tim prepared the parts. It took a week to build the wheel. The entire smithy, plus 10 carpenters and a mason for the foundation. The wheel was set up on the stream 200 paces from the smithy, 2 meters in diameter, 12 blades, an oak shaft, a gear-driven transmission mechanism. The system assessed it. 60 experience points. Then Ethan connected the wheel to the bellows of the spare forge they'd set up by the stream. The bellows pumped on their own, without a person. The forge burned evenly and constantly. The temperature was stable. Productivity doubled. Haldor stood and watched. The bellows pumped on their own. Water turned the wheel turned the shaft pumped the bellows. The forge breathed. Without hands. The old man sat down on a rock by the stream. He sat there for 10 minutes. He was silent. Then he stood up and went into the smithy. Ethan found him at the anvil. Haldor was forging, silently, furiously, as if he wanted to prove that a master's hands were still needed. Ethan said nothing. A master's hands are needed. They will always be needed. The wheel does not replace the blacksmith. It frees him from mindless labor, from pumping bellows, from hand saws, so that hands can do what only hands can do. The panel flashed. Workshop, level 8. New category, siege technology. Trebuchets, ballistas, rams, siege towers, offensive and defensive structures. He opened it and froze. Trebuchet, counterweight, lever, counterweight, catapult. A stone or a pot of flammable mixture flies 300 meters, destroys a wall, destroys the formation, destroys the will to fight. This was what he needed, not for the Horde, for Warren. The Horde's creatures are fast and scattered. A trebuchet is useless against them. But Warren's men will march in formation, in armor, with shields, just as they were taught. And a 50-pound stone flying into the formation will settle the matter faster than 100 bolts. He began to build. A trebuchet is a large machine. An oak frame, an axle, a lever, a counterweight of stones in a box, a leather sling, a trigger mechanism. 3 weeks of work, 20 men. Haldy on the metal parts, Tim on assembly, carpenters on the frame, Leanne on the calculations. The trebuchet was set up on the western wall on the last day of the month. Huge. 8 meters of lever, a 300-pound counterweight, a range of 300 paces. Ethan loaded a stone and pulled the trigger. The lever shot up. The sling whistled. The stone shot into the sky and fell into the field 300 paces away. The impact was so great that the ground shook. Aylin stood on the wall and looked at the crater in the field. Then she looked at Ethan and smiled. For the second time in his life. But this smile was different. Not a flash. Slow. Warm. She stood on the wall next to a machine that could destroy the castle and smiled. And in that smile there was not the joy of war. Hope. Ethan was building a second trebuchet when the news arrived. 20 survivors from Caerwyn had reached Dornholm, exhausted, wounded. Half of them could barely stand. Una had worked all night. Her mana was enough for 6. She treated the rest with her hands. Clamps, scalpels, tools Ethan had made for her. She stitched up 11 wounds, stopped 3 hemorrhages, set 2 dislocations, without magic, with steel and her hands. In the morning she came to the smithy. She stood in the doorway. Her face was gray with exhaustion. Her hands were covered in dried blood. Ethan, he looked up. I need 2 more clamps, small ones, for the blood vessels in the fingers, and 1 more magnifying glass, a stronger one. He nodded. They'll be ready by evening. Una stood there. Then she said quietly, 11. I stitched up 11 wounds without mana. I didn't know I could. He looked at her. Now you know. She nodded. She left. But at the door she turned around and the ice in her eyes melted completely. Warren arrived first, 2 weeks before the horde. 1,000 swords, 3 battle mages, knight cavalry in the vanguard, infantry behind them, the supply train in the rear. The army stretched half a mile along the western road. Ethan saw them from the tower through a spyglass. He counted. The cavalry numbered about 80 riders, heavy infantry 300 or 400, light infantry the same number, archers perhaps 100, and 3 figures in robes, mages. He went downstairs. Aylin was already in the council chamber, a map on the table. Everyone was there. Sir Bran was sober for the first time in a month. Greta, Oswald, Priest Thomas, Sora, Volt, and Ethan. He laid out his notes. 1,000 swords, 3 mages. A wall stands against us. We didn't have time to dig a moat on the western side, but we have 2 trebuchets and 40 crossbowmen, plus crossbows, plus traps in the alleys if they break through the wall. Sir Bran raised his hand. Ethan fell silent. Bran stood up. His face was gray, his eyes were red, but sober. I'm an old fool. I got in the way. I was wrong. Silence. Bran looked around at everyone. His gaze settled on Ethan. Boy, you gave these people what I couldn't. A chance. Now tell me what to do. I'll listen. Ethan looked at the old knight. A man who had believed in one world his whole life, a world where strength was a sword and a title, and who now stood there, tearing himself in 2, in front of everyone, because the city was under siege and the enemy was in the field, and pride was no help here. He nodded. Sir Bran, I need your cavalry, both of you. What cavalry? 2 invalids. Not invalids. You and Sir Dale, on horseback, in armor, with my men behind you. When Warren sees that Dornholm is resisting, he'll send a messenger. You'll ride out to him, not to negotiate, to buy time. Every minute you spend talking to him is a minute my crossbowmen take up their positions. Bran smirked, a crooked, wicked smirk. I know how to talk. That's what I was taught. The plan. The first line. Trebuchets on the west wall. Range, 300 paces. Stones and pots of pitch. When Warren's infantry charges, the trebuchets will strike the formation. Second line, crossbowmen. 40 archers on the western wall, 30 on the eastern wall in reserve, in case the horde strikes simultaneously. Third line, crossbows in the alleys. If the enemy breaks through the wall, they'll fall into a corridor of death. Every step is a bolt. Fourth line, traps and snares at the intersections, tripwires, falling grates, pits with stakes camouflaged with planks and earth. Mages. 3 of Warren's battle mages. That's a problem. A mage can blast through the wall with a fireball, can set the trebuchets ablaze, can scatter the crossbowmen's formation. Yuna. She looked up. Your shield can withstand a fireball. 1, maybe 2. Then my mana will run out. That's enough. 1 shield at the right moment, when I give the signal. Lien. She looked up from her notes. You calculated the trajectories? Yes. 3 options depending on the wind direction. Haldi. The dwarf stood by the wall. Bolts are ready. 8,000. Armor piercing. Hardened in a horn pit. All checked. Ethan scanned the hall. Brenna stood by the door. Quiet. Finn was beside her. The boy held his mother's hand and looked at Ethan. Big gray eyes. Fearless. Full of faith. Brenna. Evacuation. Children. The elderly. Those who cannot stand on the wall. To the castle basement. 3 days' worth of water and food. If the wall falls, lead everyone through the north gate into the forest. Brenna nodded. Her face was calm. Her hands were clenched. She didn't cry. She was no longer the woman who had knelt in the blacksmith's yard a year ago. She was a commander of the evacuation. In the morning, Warren set up camp half a mile from the walls. Ethan looked through the telescope. Tents, campfires, horses, hustle and bustle. Lots of hustle and bustle. 1,000 people is a lot. They need to eat and sleep and relieve themselves and sharpen their swords. Logistics. Warren brought a supply train of 30 wagons. He has enough food for a week, maybe 2. If Dornholm holds out for 2 weeks, Warren will leave, because a hungry army doesn't fight. At noon, a horseman with a white flag rode out from the camp, a parliamentarian. Sir Bran rode out to meet him. Ethan stood on the wall and looked through his spyglass. Bran spoke. The parliamentarian spoke. Gestures. Bran pointed at the wall. The envoy pointed at the camp. Bran laughed, loudly. Ethan could hear it even from the wall. The old knight was playing his part perfectly, stalling for time. 10 minutes, 20, half an hour. The crossbowmen took their positions. The crossbows were cocked. The trebuchets were loaded. The pots of pitch were ready. Torches were burning. The messenger rode off. Bran returned. He rode through the gate, dismounted, approached Ethan. Warren is giving an hour to think it over. Then the assault. An hour. Fine. Ethan climbed the tower. Signal flags in place. Spotting scope. Hourglass. He was ready. Sora climbed up to him, stood beside him, silent, crossbow on her shoulder. The wind ruffled her short hair. Scary. She looked at him. No. I'm angry. At what? At the fact that they're taking our time. I don't have time to fight people. We have the horde in 2 weeks. Ethan looked at her. She was 19, and she said our time. Our horde. Our city. An hour had passed. Warren's army was on the move. The infantry was forming up, shields in line, spears raised, archers on the flanks, 3 mages in the center behind the infantry ranks, cavalry on the right flank. A beautiful formation. Perfect. By the book. Ethan watched and saw not people. He saw a mechanism, gears and levers. The cavalry is the striking lever. The infantry is the pressing piston. The archers are the long-range drive. The mages are the power reserve. Every mechanism has a weak link. For this one, the weak link is the formation, a tight formation in an open field, against long-range weapons they weren't expecting. The infantry advanced, a heavy, measured step, shields forward, spears overhead. 400 men in formation. At 200 paces they are beautiful. At 150, dangerous. At 100, deadly. At 50, invincible. Ethan waited. 200 paces, the red flag lowered. The first trebuchet fired. The lever flew up, the sling whistled. A pot of resin shot into the sky. It flew for 3 seconds. It fell into the 3rd row of infantry. It shattered. Burning resin splashed in all directions. A scream. The formation wavered. The second trebuchet. A stone. 50 pounds. The stone hit the 2nd row and passed through the formation like a ball through bowling pins. A scream. The formation crumpled. But they didn't run. These were soldiers, real ones. They closed their shields and moved on. 150 paces, a yellow flag, crossbowmen. A volley, 40 bolts, wooden shields, armor-piercing bolts, hardened in a furnace pit. The bolts passed through the shields as if through paper. A scream. A 2nd volley, a 3rd. The formation was crumbling, but they kept going. The mages responded. The first mage raised his hands. A fireball the size of a barrel flew into the wall. Una. Ethan shouted and lowered the white flag. Una stood on the wall with her hands raised. A blue shield flashed before her. The fireball struck the shield. An explosion. Heat. Una held her ground. The shield held. The 2nd mage struck with lightning. The lightning struck the ground. It didn't hit the wall. The 3rd mage began casting something complex. Ethan watched through the peephole as his hands moved. It took a long time. That meant a powerful spell. He couldn't wait. Green flag. Sora. Sora stood on the wall, crossbow raised. Distance to the mage, 200 paces. The limit. She took aim, exhaled, pulled the trigger. The bolt flew for a long time. A second and a half. The mage didn't see it. The mage was casting a spell. The bolt hit him in the shoulder. The mage fell. The spell crumbled. Sora reloaded. 2nd bolt. 2nd mage. 200 paces. Hit. In the thigh. The mage fell to one knee. 200 paces. 2 hits. The archers on the wall saw. A shout. Excitement. Sora didn't scream. She reloaded. Warren's formation had reached 100 paces. The trebuchets struck again. The crossbowmen fired without stopping. 3 bolts a minute each. 120 bolts a minute. The formation was breaking apart. Men were falling. But some reached the wall. They began climbing. Ladders, ropes with hooks, hand-to-hand combat on the wall. Volt with a sword in one hand and a crossbow in the other. Bran on the wall with a 2-handed sword. The old, drunken knight swung as he had in his youth. His knee wouldn't bend, but he didn't care. Ethan stood on the tower and counted. Warren's losses. 200. 300. 400. The formation collapsed. The cavalry didn't move. A smart cavalry commander saw what was happening and didn't lead his men to their deaths. Warren's men fled. Not all of them. The most stubborn were still fighting on the wall, but the bulk of them ran back to camp. By morning, the battle was over. Warren had lost more than half men, over 600, killed, wounded. those who fled into the night and never returned. Dornholm lost 11. 11. 4 killed, 7 wounded. Una worked all night. Clamps, scalpels, hands, mana, everything she had. 7 survived. Warren was brought in that morning, wounded, on a stretcher. His men had raised a white flag. Ethan climbed down from the wall. He approached. Count Warren lay in the blacksmith's yard, half his face in a bandage. His right arm was already gone. Now his left shoulder was covered in blood. Ethan crouched down beside him. Warren looked at him with his one good eye. "You understand what you've done. You've killed chivalry." Ethan was silent. Peasants with ballet, artisans on the walls, a woman who shot from 200 paces. "This isn't war. It's a meat grinder." Ethan remained silent. Then he replied, "No, Count. I've simply proven that every man is worth something. You killed chivalry yourselves when you forgot that you were supposed to protect it." Warren closed his eye. He was breathing heavily. Then he opened it. "The horde is coming." "I know. 2 weeks. My survivors. You'll take them." Ethan looked at him. Warren was offering his men, those who remained, a little over 200 men, to defend Dornholm. Why? Because if the city falls, my domain is next. And because you're right, I forgot why knighthood exists. Ethan stood up. "Una, take care of the Count." Una approached with a case. She opened it. Clamps, scalpels, hands that didn't tremble. Ethan went into the smithy. Everyone was waiting for him inside. Haldor at the bellows, Tim at the workbench, Haldi with a hammer, Leanne with her notes, Sora with a crossbow, Brenna with a jug of water, and Finn. The boy sat in the corner, polishing the crossbow's stock, in his boot, not limping. Ethan stood and watched them. Then he sat down. Brenna handed him a mug. He drank. The water was cold and clear. Haldor silently poured him some beer. He set the beer aside and took the water. No time for beer. The horde in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Ethan hadn't slept. 4 hours a day. Sometimes 3. Brenna brought him food and made him eat. Una came by and checked on him. Once she poured a healing mana wave into him that made him sleep for 6 hours. He woke up angry. She said she didn't care, and that a dead engineer was more useless than a living idiot. He didn't argue. Warren's 200 men joined the garrison. Soldiers, real ones, with swords and shields and discipline, but without crossbows. Ethan armed 40 of them in a week. Sora trained them. The new archers were worse than the old ones, but better than nothing. The remaining 160 took their places on the walls with swords and spears, just in case the creature scaled the wall and they had to hack it down by hand. Sir Bran commanded them. The old knight had changed after the battle with Warren. Sober, quiet, tough. He no longer argued with Ethan. He commanded men Ethan couldn't control. Hand-to-hand combat wasn't his forte. To each his own. The walls are fortified along the entire perimeter. The moat on the east side is full of stakes, 3 rows of catapults. The western moat was dug in 5 days with the help of Warren's men. Shallow, a meter deep, but better than nothing. There are now 4 trebuchets, 2 on the western wall, 2 on the eastern wall. 40 crossbows, on all the walls and in the alleys. 72 crossbow men. 10,000 bolts. Haldi worked without a break. The dwarf never got tired. Or pretended not to get tired. Her hands were burned by the forge and her fingers were calloused down to the flesh, but she kept forging, bolt after bolt, tip after tip. Ethan stopped her once, at night, in the empty smithy. She stood at the anvil, striking with the hammer, her movements already automatic. Eyes closed. She was forging in her sleep. "Huldy!" She startled, opened her eyes. "Master, stop. Go to sleep." She looked at him. "But the bolts. There are enough bolts. You might not be enough for tomorrow. Go to sleep." She put down the hammer, walked to the door, stopped. "Master Ethan?" "Yes." "You won't drive me away." He looked at her. A little gnome, 17 years old, an outcast, lonely, frightened, not of the horde, of being driven away again, of finding herself unwanted once more. "No, never. You're Master Huldy. From my forge, from my home. You're not going anywhere." Huldy stood there, ears red, lips pressed together. Then she nodded and left. The next day, I worked harder than ever, and every bolt was perfect. Leon finished the book. 200 pages, handwritten, on parchment, with drawings and formulas and descriptions of processes. She brought it to Ethan that evening. He leafed through it. Crossbows, traps, trebuchets, metallurgy, pumps, water wheels, the basics of mechanics, the basics of physics. Everything he knew translated into the language of this world. "If I die, you won't die. If I die, the book will remain. Leon." He kept flipping through the pages. She had written everything down, even the things he explained in passing, even the jokes, even the mistakes, and the corrections to those mistakes. Because mistakes teach too. On the last page, she wrote, "Recorded by Leanne O'Reilly, from the words of Master Ethan Cross, engineer." He closed the book, looked at her, a petite woman in rock crystal glasses, ink on her fingers and nose, as always. He stood up, walked over to the workbench, took out a bundle, unwrapped it. A microscope, 2 lenses in a brass tube on a swivel stand. He had been polishing it for 3 nights, in secret. Brenna knew. Brenna always knew. She brought him tea at 3 a.m. and looked at the stand and said nothing. He held out the microscope to Leanne. She took it, looked through the eyepiece. She focused it on a drop of water on the table. She froze. 20 times magnification. The drop of water turned into a world. Movement. Shapes. Life. She saw what no one in this world had ever seen. She looked up. It was engraved on the body. Leanne's microscope. It is the world's first microscope. It bears your name. In 500 years, textbooks will write your name, not mine. Leanne held the microscope. Her hands were shaking. She opened her mouth. She closed it, opened it, said nothing, just stood there, holding it. Ethan returned to the workbench. Leanne went to her room. Brenna said later that Leanne hadn't slept at all that night. She looked through the microscope at everything, at water, at blood, at dust, at fabric, at bread, at her own skin. And she took notes. The horde came on the 11th day. Not in 2 weeks. Sooner. Morning. Fog. The horn on the eastern wall. Alarm. Ethan climbed the tower, raised the telescope. The fog was thick. Visibility 200 paces. Not enough. But he heard it. Pounding. Thousands of feet. The ground vibrated. Not dozens of creatures like in the first raid. Not hundreds. Thousands. The fog was lifting slowly. The sun was breaking through, and when it broke through, Ethan saw. The field in front of the eastern wall was black, black with creatures. They were standing, not running, standing. Thousands of them, yellow eyes in the fog. Silence. That very silence Sora had spoken of, the kind of silence that makes you want to scream. He counted, stopped counting. There were more than 2,000 of them, maybe 3, maybe 4. He couldn't count them all because the field ended, but the creatures didn't. Behind the ordinary creatures stood the large ones, twice times taller. Sora was right. Massive, heavy, with armor made of their own hardened skin. And behind them, behind the big ones, something else. Something that made Ethan's mouth go dry. A figure. One. Tall. Upright. Not a creature. Or a creature, but a different one. With something in its hands. Something like a staff. A commander. The Horde had a commander. Ethan lowered his telescope. His hands weren't shaking. He wouldn't let them shake. He looked down. On the wall, 72 crossbowmen, 40 self-firing crossbows, 4 trebuchets, a moat, catapults, traps. Behind the wall, 160 swordsmen under Bran's command. In the infirmary, Yuna with her tools. In the castle basement, Brenna with the children and the elderly. In the smithy, Haldor and Haldi are preparing spare bolts and repairing whatever breaks. Leanne on the wall with trajectory charts for the trebuchets. Sora next to him on the tower, a crossbow on his shoulder. His face is stony. Aelin is on the wall, in armor, in the modular armor that Ethan made for her personally. Every plate is tailored, every strap fits her figure. She stood among her people and looked out at the black field. Ethan raised his telescope once more. He looked at the figure with the staff. The figure raised the staff. The creatures began to move, silently, thousands of feet. A thudding sound. The ground shook. He raised the red flag. The trebuchets struck first. 4 50-pound stones shot into the sky and fell into the black mass. The earth shook. The creatures around the impact points scattered like splinters. But the rest didn't stop. They didn't even slow down. They ran forward, over their own bodies, over the stones, through the dust, silently. The slingshots took the first wave. Sharp stakes ripped through the dark hide. The creatures fell. They collided. They screeched. The first sound, not a scream, a screech, thin and piercing, one that made your teeth ache. But behind the first came the second, and the third. They ran over the dead and the wounded. They leaped over the stakes. A wave. A living black wave that knows no retreat. The moat took the second wave. The front ranks fell down, onto the stakes. Black blood flooded the bottom. The next ones leaped over the moat. Long legs, strong. Some made it over, some did not. The moat filled with bodies. The dead became a bridge for the living. Ethan lowered the yellow flag. Crossbows. 72 crossbows fired in unison, a whistle, an impact. 72 bolts into the black mass. Bodies fell. Reload. 3 seconds. Volley. 3 seconds. Volley. 120 bolts per minute. The crossbows on the wall clicked one after another. The tension wires snapped from the bodies. The mechanisms fired. Bolts flew. Without missing. Without fear. Without fatigue. The mechanisms did what they were built to do. Ethan stood on the tower and counted. Not the creatures. Bolts. Ammo consumption. First minute, 120. Second, 110. 10 crossbows fell silent. Overheated strings, jammed mechanisms, malfunctions. Normal. He had anticipated it. Spare crossbows on the wall. The archers grabbed the spares and continued. Third minute, fourth, fifth. The creatures reached the wall. They scraped their claws against the stone. The stone held. They couldn't climb the smooth stone. But the wooden part of the wall, their claws dug into the wood. The first creature climbed over the log onto the wall. An archer nearby turned and fired point blank. The bolts went right through the creature. The creature fell over the wall into the city. Bran's swordsmen impaled it on their spears. The second creature, the third, the 10th. The wall was being overrun. Bran shouted orders. The swordsmen hacked away. The crossbowmen fired at those climbing from below. Chaos. Ethan raised a white flag, a signal for Una. She had nothing to do yet, but she had to be ready. There would soon be many wounded. Then the giants came. He saw them through the telescope, twice as tall as the ordinary ones, heavy, slow, but every step was like a battering ram. They crossed the moat without jumping. They walked over bodies. They walked over stakes. The stakes snapped under their weight. The first giant reached the wall and struck against it. The logs creaked. The wall shook. Ethan felt it in the tower. The vibration traveled through the stone into his legs. The trebuchet on the eastern wall. Reloading. 20 seconds. Leanne stood by the trebuchet and shouted to the crew. Closer. The target is closer. Angle 45. No, 42. The crew aimed. Fire. The stone flew in a short arc, 50 paces. It hit the big creature. The creature collapsed like a rag doll. Leanne clenched her fist. But the second large one struck the wall in another spot. The logs burst. A breach. The creature crawled inside. The swordsman rushed in. Bran was first. A two-handed sword slashed at the creature's neck. The hide was tough. The sword got stuck. Bran yanked, couldn't pull it out. The creature turned toward him. A claw slashed. Bran flew back into the wall. The armor held. Modular. Etan. The shoulder guard dented but didn't break. Bran's steel. Without a sword. He picked up a fallen soldier's spear. He struck the creature in the eye. The creature collapsed. A breach. Ordinary ones were crawling through the breach. Dozens. Crossbows in the alleys took out the first ones. Click, whistle, body. Click, whistle, body. But the crossbows were out of ammunition. 12 shots. 12 dead creatures. No one to reload. No time. They kept coming and coming. Etan counted. 10,000 bolts. About 4,000 used up in 20 minutes of fighting. 6 left. At the current rate, enough for 30 minutes. Then that's it. Then swords and bare hands and death. He needs to do something. Right now. He climbed down from the tower. Ran toward the breach, across the square, past people hacking away, past bodies, past black and red blood. The breach was 2 meters wide. The creatures were crawling through it, and the swordsmen were hacking at them, falling, getting up, and hacking again. The falling grate. He'd placed 2 in the alleys, but not against the wall. Idiot. We need a grate for the breach, right now. He grabbed the nearest soldier by the shoulder. Logs. Drag logs from the supply depot. 3 of them, long ones, and ropes. The soldier ran off. Ethan grabbed Tim. Tim was there, with a hammer, covered in blood, not his own. "Tim, I need staples, big ones, and hinges from the spare gate, in the smithy." Tim ran off. Ethan stood by the breach and worked, with his hands, with his head. The soldiers dragged the logs over. Tim brought the staples and hinges. Ethan assembled the grate right on the ground, under the arrows, under the claws. The swordsman held the breach. Bran was among them, without a helmet, blood on his face, not his own. Una would stitch his up later. The grate. 3 logs laid horizontally, brackets, nails, a hammer. Every blow precise. Now was no time for mistakes. 5 minutes. The grate was ready, rough, crooked, but heavy and sturdy. Lift it. 4 swordsmen lifted it. They inserted it into the breach, propped it up with stakes, tied it to the wall with ropes. The creature slammed into the grate. The grate held. The creature scraped its claws against the logs. The staples creaked, but held. The crossbowmen on the wall fired through the grate at the creatures on the other side. Bolt after bolt. The breach was sealed. Ethan ran back to the tower. Sora was there. She was firing down. Her face was covered in sweat and dust. 200 paces. She was shooting at the large creatures from 200 paces away. She hit them. Every time. Ethan raised his telescope. He looked out over the field. There were fewer creatures now. The ranks were thinning. Catapults, the moat, the wall, crossbows, grills, traps, snares. Every element worked. Every cog turned. The city didn't shoot at the creatures. The city worked like a single mechanism designed by a single person. And in this mechanism, everyone had their own function. Aelin on the wall, sword in hand, next to the soldiers. She wasn't hiding. She stood and fought. In his armor. And the armor held. Brenna in the castle basement with the children. She heard the battle. She didn't come out, because her place was there, with those who couldn't defend themselves. Haldor in the smithy, repairing the crossbows they brought down from the wall. Broken. Cracked. He repaired them with his old hands and sent them back. Haldi was nearby, forging arrowheads, in emergency mode, without testing, without checking, just forging, because they were running out of arrowheads. Una in the infirmary, the table covered in blood, her hands covered in blood, clamps, scalpels, mana. Her hands, all together, 11 wounds in one night with the Voronovs. There would be more now, much more. Leanne at the trebuchet, trajectory tables on the board, angles, ranges. She shouted the calculation figures, and the stones flew true. A figure with a staff. Ethan looked through the telescope again. The figure stood in the same spot, not moving, watching. A staff in its hand, black, long, with something on the pommel. A crystal, dark red. Ethan looked at the crystal, and the system flashed. For the first time in the battle. Artifact detected. Classification impossible. Recommendation: destroy. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew that the figure with the staff was the key. Take out the commander and the pack will scatter. Maybe. 200 paces to the figure. No. 300. Behind the line of creatures. Behind the moat. Behind the slings. No archer could hit it. Except one. Sora. She shot at 200. She hadn't tried 300. No one had tried. Sora. She turned. Her face was serious, calm. You see the figure beyond the field, with the staff. She raised her crossbow. Looked. I see it. 300 paces. She looked at him. I've never shot at 300. I know. She looked at the field, at the creatures, at the figure. then at her crossbow, at the lightweight crossbow made for her, just for her arms, for her grip, for her eye. She raised it, took aim, for a long time. The wind, the range, ballistics. She didn't know those words. She knew her weapon. Exhale. Release. The bolt flew. It flew a long way. 2 seconds. More. An arc. High. Against the wind. Fall. The bolt fell. The figure flinched. The bolt hit the shoulder, not the chest, not in the head. In the shoulder. The figure swayed. The staff swayed. The crystal flickered. And the creatures on the field froze. All of them, at once, as if someone had pressed pause. Silence. Absolute. The figure with the staff slowly turned, looked at the tower, at Ethan, at Sora. Yellow eyes, but not empty, intelligent. Ethan looked into those eyes through the spyglass and saw something in them that sent a chill down his spine. Recognition. The figure recognized him. Not the face, not the man, something else, something inside. The system. The figure raised the staff. The crystal flashed, and all the creatures turned, silently, simultaneously, and ran. Back, east, into the fog, into the wasteland. Thousands of creatures fled the city, across the moat, through the barricades, over their dead, silently, quickly, just as they had come. 5 minutes later, the field was empty, only bodies, and black blood, and silence. Ethan stood on the tower and looked out at the empty field. His hands were shaking. He let them tremble. Sora was beside him. She sat down. She placed her crossbow on her lap. Her hands were shaking too. She looked up at Ethan. "I hit it." "You hit it from 300 paces." 300 paces. She laughed, quietly. Then louder. Then the wall echoed it. A scream. A roar. People were screaming and crying and laughing and hugging and falling to their knees and getting up and screaming again. Dornholm had held out. Ethan climbed down from the wall, slowly. His legs wouldn't hold him. The square. People. Faces. Everyone was looking at him. He walked through the crowd and people parted. Not out of fear, out of something else. Aylin stood by the smithy. Her armor was crumpled, blood on her cheek. Not hers. She looked at him, and in her eyes was everything for which neither of them could find words. He stopped in front of her. She reached out and squeezed his hand, tightly, briefly. Then she let go. He entered the smithy. Haldor was at the forge. Silently he poured a mug. Ethan takes it, sits down, drinks. Hot. Bitter. Haldor sits across from him. They are silent. The door opens. Tim, Haldor, Sora, Leanne, Brenna with Finn, Yuna, last. Their hands are washed, but there is still blood on their cuffs. Everyone is here. Everyone is alive. Everyone is looking at him. Ethan sets down the mug. The sun is rising outside the window. It rises over the city that tonight became something more than a city. And Ethan knows this isn't the end. The figure with the staff is gone. It will return. The horde will return. The world didn't change overnight. The archmages in the capital still fear him. The church still considers the mechanisms heresy. Somewhere there are other time travelers. Somewhere in the castle's basement lies a 200-year-old blueprint signed by Master Alan Wright of Chicago. Someone patient sends engineers into this world once a century, and someone persistent destroys them. But today the city stands, the people are alive, the wall holds. Crossbows on the walls, bolts in the armory, Leanne's book on the shelf, a microscope on the table, a pump by the well. The water wheel turns. Tim reads the blueprints. Haldy forges springs with an oval cross-section. Finn runs without a cane. Crom walks without a chair. Viren stands on his own 2 feet. Sora shoots 300 paces. Yuna heals wounds without mana. Aelin smiles. The world didn't change overnight, but Dornholm has changed. And from Dornholm, it will spread further. Because knowledge that is recorded and passed on does not die with the gifted. It lives on, it grows, it multiplies. The mill and the bridge are more important than a court mage. Ethan knew that from day one. Now the whole city knows it. Tomorrow, the province will know. In a year, the kingdom. He finishes his mug. He stands up. He walks over to the forge. He picks up the hammer. Haldor watches him. What's next? Ethan looks at the panel. Workshop, level 9. The hydraulics category is unlocked. Ahead lie water pipes, sewers, heating, a factory, a school, students, dozens, hundreds. Everything lies ahead. He raises the hammer and begins to forge.